everyone to tonight's City Council meeting. We are grateful to have you joining us as we continue to hold electronic meetings. We welcome all of the members of the public who may be watching our usual video feeds online. And even though we are not in person, this meeting is still considered an open and public meeting. Today is a work session only, and there is no public comment scheduled. However, Tuesday, April 6th will be the next opportunity for the public to comment during our 7 p.m. formal meeting. That being said, as always, your feedback is always welcome, and you can share that with the City Council anytime by mailing us at P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114, or emailing us at council.comments@slcgov.com, or by calling our 24-hour phone comment line at 801-535-7654. This is only a work session, and we have quite a bit on our agenda. So council members and public, I am really going to try to not bump anything if we can help it. There are some really important topics that I want to give a good amount of time to, and I want to make sure that we're having good discussions. And so I'm forewarning you now. And I want to apologize to any of our community members that may be joining us and may have waited a while for us to start our work session. We had a wonderful RDA work session meeting with some really important conversations that needed to happen. So we apologize for being a little bit late, and thank you for your patience. With that, let's get straight into the agenda. Our first item is our weekly or standing item of updates from the administration, and I will turn the time over to you, Madam Mayor, unless there is somebody you're delegating to, but the floor is yours. So thank you for being with us, Madam Mayor.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Madam Chair. And fortunately for your packed schedule, I have a brief update for you today. We are continuing to monitor our local COVID data, and we're happy to see the continuing downward trend in our city and around the country, of course. And I hope everybody's getting their vaccination appointments at vaccinate.utah.gov or visit the county health department. And as you know, there's a lot of local and chain pharmacies that are also able to vaccinate now. We're working with our team and yours on incoming federal funds, the ARA dollars, and we're grateful for the council's partnership to make sure that every dollar that we spend is underpinned by equity. I want to give you an update on the Rio Grande and Fleet Block area and also frame the shared housing ordinance that's on your agenda today. First, our outreach team has been working in the Rio Grande area for several weeks, and next week, service providers will bring a bunch of resources to the area, including COVID testing on the 29th and a resource fair the next day on the 30th. The area will be closed to camping beginning on the 30th, and on April 1st, the health department will clean the area. I've heard from a lot of residents and business owners in the Fleet Block area that are struggling with safety issues in their community around the Fleet Block. And we understand those frustrations and concerns, and we're working as an administration to gather sufficient resources to address them as immediately as possible, because everyone deserves access to shelter and a clean and safe public space for everyone. And in addition to addressing criminal activity that's in that area, service providers will be turning their attention to the Fleet Block area, and they plan to hold a resource fair there on April 7th. That'll be followed by a county health department cleaning and closure of the area to camping. We share your concern, council members, about the individual who was injured in the fire at the Fleet Block in the building there, and grateful that no one else in the area was injured. Also grateful for our Salt Lake City Fire Department's quick response, and that investigation into how it happened is ongoing right now. All of this around homelessness shifts and I think leads well into the shared housing ordinance, because Salt Lake City and this city council have for a long time been a leader in the state of Utah for expanding housing access and options, because we have recognized the need for more housing options across a wide spectrum of affordability. And our city's RDA has firsthand experience with 50 units of safe and successful privately run shared housing in what has traditionally and is still currently in many ways a very difficult area of the city right on Rio Grande. Shared housing has made housing an affordable and accessible reality for about 50 people who might otherwise be camping on the street. And we know from our citywide housing master plan that shared housing is one of the key parts we need in more areas of the city. And by broadening the application of the land use, we're going to be opening housing doors to many of those same individuals who are being served by our resource fairs and camping on the street, and that you hear about from us in every homeless update we give. This isn't a stretch of the imagination or a stretch for those who need this housing to be able to get into it necessarily. It's a really key part of the solutions that we need, and the private market is ready to help make it happen. So I want to urge you to consider passing the shared housing ordinance. And that's all for my update, Madam Chair, unless there's any questions from council members.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Council members.
I have one question on the date. So did you say April 1st? There will be.
For which one?
About the fleet block encampment.
Okay. Yeah, the Rio Grande is on the 30th is when the resource fair, and then the closure of that area, or the cleanup rather, is on April 1st. And Fleet Block is a resource fair on April 7th, and that'll be followed by the cleaning and closure of that area to camping.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Council members, any other questions for Mayor Mendenhall? Great, thank you, Mayor, again for that. Next is our update on racial equity and policing. I believe we have Kira from council staff joining us today. Although I don't see Kira's, oh, there she is. Hi, Kira.
Hello. All right, and in the spirit of this meeting, I just got quick updates for you. First, on the police department budget audit, the consultants are preparing their preliminary findings and recommendations, and we're expecting a draft report to be available in early April. And then for the Racial Equity and Policing Commission, their next full meeting is tomorrow, March 24th at 5 p.m. These are available for the public to listen to. You can find that information at slcrepcommission.com. Then next week, next Wednesday, they'll have subcommittee meetings, and that information is also on the website. And that's all for me, unless anyone has any questions.
Thanks,
Madam Chair. Can you remind us of the date of I just missed that date of the draft of the budget?
We don't have a firm date yet, but we're looking at early April that we expect to have that available.
And council members, when we have a final draft, we will do a briefing of the audit and the recommendations, a public briefing there. But really looking forward to it. It sounds from what I've heard from staff in talking with our auditors that they have some really great recommendations and some things that I'm looking forward to seeing what they found. I think that it is seems to me to have been a very well done audit, and I'm looking forward to that. So Cindy, you popped on. Is there anything?
Just to clarify for the public, it won't be that we'll have a draft budget or anything. It's just the audit.
Thank you. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Kira. With that, we will get straight into our first discussion, which is the shared housing zoning text amendments. This was formerly known as the single room occupancy, or SRO ordinance. We have had quite a few, honestly, briefings on this, but I think in part because it is such an important ordinance and something that we all are in lots of ways deeply passionate about. And so we've set aside some time for this and hope that we have a good, robust discussion. I am going to, I know that we have Russell Weeks from council office here. I believe our CAN director, Blake Thomas, is here, and I see Nick Norris, our planning director, here as well. So I'll turn the time over to Russell, and then we'll go from there. Thanks, Russell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Please bear with me. I would like to at least recap some of the issues or how we started and how we got here. This is a follow-up to 2 council events. One is the second public hearing on the proposed ordinance, and the other is a city council briefing on the discussion of the administration's housing effort. The second public hearing was November 20th. Was November 20th. The discussion of the administration's housing initiatives was December 1st. Shared housing is considered the lowest rung of affordable housing. Shared housing usually accommodates the homeless, the aged, people with disabilities, and people who make low wages and students. Shared housing is a permitted use. Under the proposed ordinance, the number of acres in the city where shared housing would be a permitted land use would increase from 688 acres to 3,114 acres. 1,264 acres would be west of I-15. 1,850 acres would be east of I-15. Under the new ordinance, shared housing would be a permitted use in areas generally zoned as downtown and commercial districts. It is already a permitted use in areas zoned as transit station areas and as form-based urban neighborhood zones. Shared housing under the proposed ordinance would not be a permitted use in areas zoned as smaller neighborhood residential districts and in smaller neighborhood residential business districts and in most residential districts, including multifamily housing. There were 4 issues raised after the public hearing. One was a concern about the health and safety of using a shared kitchen in a shared housing building. A question about whether there should be a limit on the number of housing units per building. A question about whether shared housing should be a conditional use instead of a permitted use. And a question about whether there is a model or models of managing shared housing that have proven successful. Council staff has tried to answer those questions in the written staff report, and in the interest of time, I'm going to leave it as right there for the council to discuss.
That's your cue, kids. Discuss away. Yes, Andrew.
Can somebody tell me the difference between how we regulate motels and how a shared housing would work? My real question is, right now, is Rio Grande a shared housing, or do we see it as a motel under the city statute?
I believe it's a shared housing, and the reason it's a shared housing is because they have common cooking facilities where most motels don't. So that's probably the biggest difference right now between some of the motels that are operating somewhat similarly. Like one example was the Capitol Motel on State Street, which is now gone and under construction as low-income housing. But that's the primary difference. A motel is just the room and bathing facilities, and there's not usually any sort of cooking or food options available as part of it.
But if a motel has free breakfast and a cafeteria and essentially a dining area with facilities, is it the length of the lease? Is it the cooking itself? Give me a sense of why couldn't somebody go into an existing motel in the city, do 30-day leases or less, and keep it as a motel, but basically it's shared housing at this point.
From a zoning perspective, there's nothing that would prevent somebody from doing that. And in fact, we've had high-profile residents of the city live in hotels for years. So it's, I mean, it is what it is. But yeah, there's nothing that would prevent that.
I mean, Rick Majerus was there for how long at the Marriott?
I think as long as he was
as long as
at the University of Utah.
I guess we need more housing. I agree with the mayor. This is something that's needed. It's probably going to be motels. They're going to be transitioned in some capacity, most likely. My concern has been it doesn't catch all the motels in the city, only some along certain areas. And by doing this, are we going to inadvertently not allow other motels to essentially do that in these areas? We're going to funnel this housing away from those motels to other motels, essentially, whether it's official or unofficial. I don't know. Nobody knows the answer, but that's my concern about this. My second question is, I'm concerned about the unintended effects outside those buildings. This has been brought up by other council members, but I think some people have had bad experiences in the last couple of years with the resource centers, and fair or not, they're not the same as the shared housing option. However, how would we not have what's happened out front of those buildings with congregating in the public right of way that's legal and fair from happening in these locations as well? Is that something when you look at through business licensing for the license of the owner or the operator? Or because I don't think we do that well under zoning, do we?
Would this concern? Sorry, Nick. Go ahead.
So yeah, zoning is not a great tool to regulate behavior that occurs off the site of a use. A lot of times, whether that behavior is associated with that use or the perception is that it's associated with that use, there's really not much you can do if, for example, there's some undesirable activity that's happening around the corner from a use. It's really hard to hold that one use accountable for that. And that's just the reality of zoning. And it was never really set up to regulate behavior. It was to regulate land use and deal with that. But we have put some things in place for other uses that, whether real or not, have a perception of having more broad impacts. So, for example, bars have a management plan that they're required to submit. It gets reviewed by the police department and approved by them as part of their approval if it's a conditional use. And homeless resource centers have something similar. It's important to note that the two key components for that deals with offsite really is those establishments setting up a plan to meet with the community and the neighbors if there is a problem. It's not necessarily to solve that problem. It's to set up an avenue for communication to do it. And so that's kind of the big caveat. One thing, going back to the question about the difference between a motel and a shared housing, the motel obviously has nightly rentals. The shared housing has a minimum of a week, and that's intended to help provide a little bit more permanency than I mean, I'd say that loosely, but than just a nightly rental.
Does the requirement that this ordinance that a property have a property manager on site 24 hours a day help with any of your concerns, Andrew?
I think this goes back to the operator and how do we hold an operator accountable? And that's where my licensing question came up. We don't have that right now. So depending on the operator, that could be a great thing. well-run, organized, clean, well-maintained for the residents, et cetera, et cetera. But in our land use, we have no way to do that. So if we want that, I think we're gonna have to look through licensing or something else in the city to make sure that happens. And that's one of my concerns about having this without that in some ways.
Okay. Cindy, I saw that you popped on. Did you want to add something here?
Oh, just a couple of things going on what Nick was saying, that there are just a few cases like the bars where the council has tried to regulate offsite activity. And the one thing I wanted to run by you, Nick, is in the case of the bars, there is a requirement for cleanup in the vicinity every morning by a certain hour. Can you tell us if it makes any sense in this case, or perhaps you've already looked at that and it's already included? I don't know.
It's not included because we haven't put the management plan in as a requirement for this use. And looking at those regulations, I think what it says, and I'm actually reading them right now, is that
Thank you.
They basically any kind of trash that's on the premises be collected and deposited in by 6 a.m. the next day. So when we talk about premise, that would include the sidewalk park strip immediately in front of that use, but not necessarily beyond that in front of other properties and things like that. And so that's just to clarify how that applies.
Okay. And then there also was a lot of conversation at the time about people going outdoors to smoke and perhaps walking down the block and standing in front of other people's property and things like that. I don't remember ever figuring out a solution to that. Was there anything we said in there?
The only thing that we required is that they have a designated spot on their property for smoking.
Okay.
So it doesn't address someone leaving the site and, while they're walking to another destination, walking down the sidewalk, smoking and discarding their cigarette butts anywhere and littering and things like that. It doesn't address that.
Okay. And then the other one was the fraternity and sororities. They are required to submit the annual report. And the goal of that was avoiding the loud parties and things like that. Is there anything in there besides just the annual report and the meeting convening?
It's been a really long
You have
time.
everything memorized.
It's been a really long time since I've looked at that to that code or had to actually open up any of those reports. I know that we get them not as frequently as required by code, but and some are better than others submitting them. But I can certainly look at that and see what's entailed.
Okay, it's probably not much, but we're kind of grabbing at straws. Thank you.
Yeah, understand, absolutely.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Nick. Let's see, Darren, and then I think Chris, you had your hand up as well.
Do you want to go before me, Chris?
No, Cindy's questions answered mine. Thanks.
Thanks. So I appreciate Andrew's questions. I'll just let everyone know I'm having a really hard time with this because I definitely do not have the support of my constituents to pass this. And I know that's not the only consideration. There's, broader things that we need to think about, but in this case, it's pretty unanimous and loud that I don't have that support. The reasons why I agree with my constituency for a couple of things are, one, I think that we don't have, to me, it's not clear how the 24-hour on-site management is going to mitigate the issues or any of the other things in the ordinance. I know there are a lot of things that are well-intentioned, but it's not clear how we're going to enforce those. So I'm concerned about that. And then if you look at the maps, it heavily impacts some parts of the city and not others. And I know the justification that I've heard is because that's close to transit, and that makes some sense to me. And I think there's logic to that. My question is there a way that we can create like a buffer around them. I don't know if that's legal for us to do and say if there can't be more than one of these every half mile or something like that, so that at least we don't get a really strong concentration of this use within one neighborhood. And maybe that buffer also exists around homeless resource centers or something like that. I have no idea if that's legal or plausible or logistically possible, but it seems like one way to at least temper that concern about geographic equity with this use, because I think we could go into it with rose-colored glasses and think that this is not going to have any impact on the neighborhood, and that's sort of how I remember the resource centers being discussed, but that hasn't been the case. And so I'm just trying to know how to sort of protect those ancillary uses, and maybe if they're spread out, that would be less of an impact.
Madam Chair, a small point in history, I believe there's a distance requirement for payday loan businesses.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt. Yes, there is. I think it's per population as well. There's one every, I don't remember, 10,000, 20,000 people, something like that, that we do already. That we have that in place.
Okay. I have some comments, but I'll wait until other council members have asked questions or maybe given some comments. Anna?
Yeah, I think I share the concerns with Councilmember Mano and Councilmember Johnston. Obviously, the elephant in the room is that a lot of things will happen in District 4. District 4 hosts multitudes of different types of housing and social services related to housing and resource centers, and I don't think the city is ready to have another to test this one out as proposed right now, because I don't think we have the enforcement mechanisms that we need. We just don't have the system right now, and it's evident because of what's happening in downtown. And so I feel like going forward with this might burden the city a little bit more, and we don't have the resources to help it. And so my constituency as well, it's opposed to this, and I would think that maybe we leave this proposal, leave these uses in the locations that are allowed right now, and wait and see if we have evidence that we're, whatever it's happening, these type of uses are nuisances or not. But I don't think confident right now that we should expand that use. Thank you.
May I suggest something that I'm feeling right now? To be fair, in a single family home, I could, if I so desired, or if someone in my house so desired, or a visitor that I had over, I could, one, have a get together with people because I live here. And two, any one of those people could walk out on the street and smoke a cigarette and throw it onto somebody else's lawn. And yet we're not talking about how to regulate my single family home. And then too, I have to be really honest right now, I'm struggling a little bit with this conversation. To suggest that, and I can't even go there. To sort of suggest that a shared housing unit is similar to payday loans that we know take advantage of people and are predatory by nature, and that is somehow similar to shared housing, really concerns me. I think that what we're talking about here is creating space. We're creating homes. We're creating the ability for people to get into housing, which is something we've been talking about since forever. And yet at the same time, we're characterizing it as a problem, as a security issue that the city's not prepared for. And it sounds, I mean, and this is a hard conversation to be hearing right now. I think that we have an opportunity, and don't get me wrong, I recognize that, you know, we know anecdotally and maybe even through actual numbers and metrics that crime rates may rise or things may occur around homeless resource centers or things like that. But I can guarantee that there are probably like people selling drugs on the side of my street. And yet again, we're not trying to necessarily regulate the use of my single family home. And so I'm hoping that we can maybe broaden this conversation to not characterize this as something that that's going to create a problem, and that people, and that's the issue we have to look at. But maybe I would like to look at how do we change this narrative of creating a space where people can afford to live. We hear so often that people, somebody's not on mute. If somebody, sorry, I can just hear backgrounds. If we start to, this is, sorry, I lost my train of thought. We hear a lot that there are people who don't want to go to the homeless resource centers for a number of reasons. And their own personal trauma that they have been through, the idea of being in a large, you know, dorm room style space, anxieties, mental health. We hear all of these things. And for me, this shared housing could be one of those solutions where somebody has some space that is theirs, that then they can still interact and have other safe, secure space to be a part of. I look at an example with the First Step House. Recognize, and I think this goes back to Andrew's comment, which I do believe is a really well taken comment for me. But the First Step House, they have an entire, their whole process, their whole setup is shared housing, and it works, and we see that it works, and the community probably doesn't even realize how many units that they have over in that area. And so for me, I think this is a great option to be looking at. And while the concentration may be in some areas more than others, I understand that. But what is included is Sugar House along the S line. I'm looking at the districts. And along, the Sugar House Central Business District 1 and 2. And yet, let's see, there's 3 Sugar House places that this would include. And so while it may concentrate in some areas, I also think that we can, that this can be one of those solutions that we keep talking about, that we need diversity within our housing. We need the affordability. We need spaces that people will go to and be able to go to. And we're shutting it down based on perceptions. And I'm concerned about that a little bit. James?
Yeah, Madam Chair. To me, this conversation is feeling a lot, well, more and more like the ADU conversations that we've had of old. Whereas this is something new, we discuss it, we go back and forth, we say, come back and bring this, we implement, and it's not as horrible as everybody thinks it is. So there's maybe one or two that start, and then we come back again and say, oh crap, we need a lot more of this because it's working and people are looking at it. So I don't see an issue with this moving forward, passing this ordinance, revisiting it, seeing if we are. I mean, really, who's to say the state's not going to come in and say this? We need to start doing SROs everywhere, right? So let's establish our ordinance for the zones that we want to make it in and say it's working here, it's not working there. And literally in 5 or 7 years, the state really will come in like they did this last session talking ADUs. So let's make sure we're aligned because we're already ahead of the game. We already helped influence the ADU ordinance this year up at the Hill. Thank you, Mr. Nick Norris, our director there, for that, and all the people that were influential on that. But this is where this conversation is. I feel like it's deja vu again.
Chris?
It's funny that James brought that up because it does feel kind of like the ADU discussion again. And we came in at the tail end of that and finally moved forward. But ADUs have not been the the destruction to the neighborhood that they were. A lot of opponents claim that they would be, and our city being able to move forward with it and work out a lot of the kinks and regulate it to a point that works for our city also gave us good bargaining power in working with the legislature in being able to retain local control. So I fully understand that there are residents that that don't want to see this in their neighborhood. But I mean, I think those same residents would also acknowledge that the problem of unsheltered people in our city has gotten worse since the time that we've passed the growing SLC plan, that this has always been an integral part of the Grow SLC plan. There's not a way that we're going to get out of the problem that we have of unsheltered people that are concentrated in districts in the downtown district and downtown area and surrounding neighborhoods if we don't have SROs. There's no way we're going to get out of it. And so I think we have to, what I would encourage is that the parade of horribles that everyone thought we were going to have with ADUs did not bear out. We have been able to regulate them. This gives us a lot more tools to shut down or to fine or to influence bad behavior or try to curtail the kind of SROs that we don't want to see, and it gives us more tools than what we had in our toolbox to regulate ADUs. So I would just encourage council members who weren't here for the ADU discussion to have that perspective, or to not have it, but I would invite you to consider that because I think that that's really critical. And it has made a big difference for Salt Lake City. So if nothing changes, we're just going to have more of the same problem.
Andrew?
I don't disagree with most of this. My concern is why not do it citywide then? Why wouldn't a motel on Skyline, so the Skyline Inn on Foothill, on 21st South, all the way up to 21st and 21st State Street? Why wouldn't those areas also want to be part of this discussion then? Because we need this, but we don't only need it in certain areas. We need to look at where we can get properties sometimes where there's transit on some of those places, guys. And we're not including it in this. That's one of my fundamental concerns. And look, housing is what we need badly. I fully agree with that. I already have it on North Temple. I'll embrace it on North Temple. Bring it to North Temple. I'm happy with that. But I think if we're excluding other areas of the city, I think we're not going to have the same equity discussions we need to have. This has got to be shared across multiple places, and it may be addressed in future zoning changes across State Street and other parts of the city by FB&U and other things, TSA. But I think we need to be very clear about that going forward, that this is not an experiment in one area and we drop it, because future councils are not bound to readdress this. So I think we need to really be focused heavily on ensuring that we had all the properties that might be a good idea, all the places that could possibly be used, just to make sure we have all those options available. That's my concern.
Thank you, Andrew. I agree with you. And yes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I think Nick can speak to your direct question, Councilmember Johnston, after me, but I want to mention that when I was on the council, I pushed back on this proposal for the shared housing expansion because of the geographic application. And as we had in a discussion at your last council meeting about how much we wish we had the housing mitigation loss work done in tandem with these other housing conversations, planning, that's not the way it was set up when they started this work before I was here. And it was more important that we get the tool out there. And the advocates like Pamela Atkinson have been, beating the drum with both the state and private investors about utilizing this tool with its expansion, hopefully in other parts of the state as well. And so we wanted to get this to you, not pull it back into planning and start a process over. I want to expand this application into other parts of the city. I agree with you, Councilmember Johnston, but our desire, because of the urgency and the need of housing, was to just get this expansion going as it was queued up. And we can do the other geographic expansion in the next phase.
Yeah, as someone who has fewer amounts of zones that would qualify, I'm also open to having that discussion in the future, but I don't think that should hold us back today.
Councilmember Mono. And then, sorry, Dan, you might have been first.
I think Dan was first.
Rochambeau.
Okay, I would agree about the expansion. And I will say, though, also on the Skyline, just of an education there, that was a hotel that had a lot of issues, a lot of drug dealings and a lot of problems in that corner. They did have a management changeover, and they've supported some shared housing type work there. And they're serving, I think, close to a dozen people who are on vouchers and living there. And because of the management, they've cleaned up the whole act. And you don't see any of the problems that we saw before when it was just a poorly run motel. So it is being used right now in that very similar fashion. And I agree, my district has none. I'm the only district that has none of the zoning for it. But I think you're right. We do need to open it up. I also don't have a lot of hotels. So, but I am more than willing to, move forward that. But I also don't want to make sure that we move forward quicker than wait around for this.
Darren.
Thanks. Amy, this is a really hard conversation for me also, and I resonate with a lot of the things that you said. I also don't think it's appropriate to call something that gives a person a house similar to payday loan lending. That I get why that feels harsh and wrong to you. I think that the intent is a little bit different with looking at the buffer though, because I think, yes, we have to give someone a house. The resource centers have to exist, but it's not true that they don't come with any negative effects on the neighborhood. So I think that is the issue that perhaps a buffer might solve. I think that the comment about regulation, I want to just bring one little rebuttal to your comment about regulation of single family housing. Actually, single family zones are the most regulated land use in the entire city. And it's a zone, like we have some areas in the city where it's law that one family has to occupy 12,000 square feet of land. And that's the highest degree of regulation that I can even imagine. And the, like a law that requires one family to occupy that much land, to me, it's, I know I'm opening up a can of worms here, but that is the highest degree of regulation, and therefore we hear the least complaints from people that live there because it's not as intensive a land use. And I'm all for growing and density, and I know that that's the direction we have to go with the city. And I choose to live in an area that is a multifamily area because I like it, because I like the connection to transit, and I like how close I can walk to a restaurant or a bar. But I think that we need to realize that these uses do oftentimes come with negative neighborhood impacts, and I want to make sure we're doing as much as we can to mitigate those, because I do live very close to one of the well, I live right between both resource centers, and the impacts are, they are real. So I think it's important to, that's where my hesitation comes from.
Council members, other thoughts? You know, I think one of the things in the future, if this were, hopefully when and if we pass this, one of the things I would like to see in the future, and we often come back to ordinances or to things and say, after kind of dealing with them for a little bit, and say, do we need to tweak this? And this may be one of those that we need to tweak. In fact, I think with the ADUs, we kind of, didn't we put something in there that we needed to come back, or that we've done it with RDA policies and other, I don't know if we've done it with ordinances, but where we say, let's review this in a year or in 2 years and see if we need to revise anything, right? So one of the things that really piqued my interest, though, is this idea of what plan did you, the management plan that bars have to give? I mean, that may be something that in the future, if we see that that's necessary to address some of that, like who's managing these properties, right? Kind of both to Andrew and Dan's points, that may really depend, how this looks may really depend on who's actually managing or owning the property and doing that. But that might be something that we look at for the future rather than taking it all back to the drawing table. It's similar to expanding it, right? I think we should expand it. Just some of my finishing thoughts there. Anyone else on this? I don't even know how long we've been talking about it, because now my agenda's so off that I can't remember what time we started. So any
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm fine supporting it, but I do want something in there about, we got to address this geographic thing across the city. We can't leave it up to sort of, if there's issues, then we deal with it. We need a time frame to start discussing it. Otherwise, we won't get back to it. We know there's 1,500 things on everybody's sort of backed up plate to get to. Even on planning, I mean, I hate to say this to Nick, but you know, we're asking you to do all sorts of stuff right now, probably not enough resource. I don't know, we're going to get back to this in the next decade or maybe 20 years. And at that point, it may not even matter. But that's my concern. If we're going to do it tied in, particularly if we're going to do it tied to transportation, every time we put a transit line in the city, we better be rezoning around it for this. I think that's got to be a requirement, frankly, in my book. We cannot put 15-minute buses anywhere in the city and not rezone for this, for housing like this. So I'd like to tie it into that.
Well, we don't have anything. I mean, the tentative council action is TBD, and I really would like to get something passed sooner rather than later. Maybe we can work with the attorney's office on some language with some of those requirements, or making it so that we have to come back and review it or something. Yes, Russell.
Well, Madam Chair, I mean, my takeaway, I have 3 takeaways here. One, there's interest in adopting the ordinance, but it would be clauses, 3 clauses. One, to review the ordinance in a year, and to make sure that if necessary, a management plan be adopted, and a need to address geographic equity in the future. Is that safe to say?
I think so. Council members?
I would like this to be addressed now, this geographic equity then, not in the future. Like whenever we take action in this, to happen now. And then I would like to add the business licensing portion for enforcement of this, because yes, Dan said that there was a good management company that took care of the motel in his district, but we also have plenty of managers in some of our motels in our city that are doing a really poor job, and we cannot enforce. And we haven't had the ability to take care of the public right away around this poorly managed properties and businesses. And so I think since we do business licenses regardless for multifamily housing, maybe this could be an addition to to the shared housing, for us to require business licensing.
Nick.
So just a couple of things to help follow up maybe on some of what I've heard and moving forward. But I think there's a key point to keep in mind is that we understand equity issue and the geographic equity issue in this city. And that goes back to 1927 when the city was first born, because what neighborhood was the one that was only limited to single and 2 family homes? It was the portions of the East Bench that existed in the city at that time. That was it. Everywhere else allowed apartments, hotels, etc. And so that's been with us for now 100 years. And it's a big thing, no question, and needs to be addressed because it is limiting how we grow as a city. And 2, part of what we were doing when we were first asked to look at this, and it was right after growing SLC was adopted, and this was the first piece that we were asked to look at, primarily because it was that step out of homelessness, of experiencing that. And because it was limited in where it could go, we needed to expand that so that we had options. The likelihood of it, if we kept it as is, the likelihood of where an SRO at the time was going to be on North Temple, and it was going to be converted motel. We knew that from the beginning. And I think that's why there were some deliberate actions taken to address that and to expand it and to really look at, there's no reason why this use shouldn't be in our downtown. And it shouldn't be in Sugar House with it being a second downtown and a mini downtown. But I think what I'm hearing too is that, we're fine. I think for the first time in a long time, we're starting to talk about actually planning our city and putting those resources into making sure our ordinances are working and doing those kinds of things instead of only reacting to development, which is what we do now. And this is a big piece of that. And there's many other pieces that we've put together to help with that. But hopefully that helps frame this conversation a little bit. I think we are absolutely willing to put together requirements for management plan. We already have some templates out there and other codes, and we can piece that together rather quickly and get it to the council. And hopefully that will help everybody feel more comfortable with where this is. But it is absolutely a critical piece to addressing housing equity in the city. And yes, it does need to be expanded to more parts of the city.
Thanks, Nick. Cindy.
Maybe we could ask Katie to address what, and I don't know if you have time, but we can also follow up and ask her to address it. But which things that have been talked about can be done now without sending it back to the Planning Commission, and which things would necessitate that? So I think Councilmember Valdemaros was talking about the separation requirement. That's one issue. Another issue is the management plan. I think the management plan, if you chose to, you could, those of you who wanted to vote for that, you could do that now without it going back to the Planning Commission. But expanding it into other zones, I'm pretty sure would necessitate it going back to the Planning Commission. So those are things we would want to check with the attorney's office and either come back to you or ask them to address now. Because I think we have a mix there. Some things could be done, other things would send it back.
Cindy, I can jump in on that. Sorry, Katie, if you want, unless you really want to take that. So the separation requirement could be handled now. That would not need to go back to the Planning Commission. You just need to identify what the specific spacing requirements you'd want to implement. And as far as the management plan, that also could be handled now as something that's a logical expansion of what the Planning Commission recommended to you. I don't think that either one of those would need to go back. Yes, expanding the locations would need to go back. You're correct.
Is there
About business, sorry, Madam Chair, what about the business licensing requirement?
Well, that wouldn't go to the Planning Commission necessarily because business licensing isn't, unless Nick has a different opinion on this, I don't think that the business licensing falls within the scope of a land use regulation. But we'd need to come up with some code language. I think we'd have to amend Title V.
That would be more like a companion ordinance that could move forward at a similar or the same time, right?
Yes.
Paul and Katie, would it be possible to put, or maybe it's a sort of legislative intent with the ordinance of like some language about coming back to look at the expansion, or take like some sort of holding us, not accountable, but kind of holding us to this promise to come back and look at expansion of this, or tying it to, similar to what Andrew said, tying it to transportation or something along those lines that maybe we could put in that wouldn't have to go back to planning?
If we're talking about expanding the geographic area, it would need to go back to planning. As far as tying your hands, you can certainly add a legislative intent. But one thing I'd try to be careful of would be binding a future council, forcing yourselves to come back. That's where we could run into a little bit of a procedural issue, I guess.
There's one thing I think you could do that is heavy-handed, and you probably wouldn't want to, but if your question is what are the options, you can always sunset the ordinance that you are passing, and that way you're sort of obligated because you don't want to get rid of everything you already have. You want to come back and do that, but that is sort of a nuclear option.
Cindy, Madam Chair, didn't we, I felt like when we passed ADUs, we said that we were going to, in 2 years, we were going to have an automatic follow-up and come back to us with how to, what sort of the next level for ADUs. Can't we do that? It wasn't a sunset, but it was like a soft set.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a
Yeah, you can do that.
delightful afternoon.
Yes,
Madam
you can do
Chair.
that. It,
Yeah, we have that queued up if Chair Vice Chair is interested in putting it on an agenda. I know that planning's happy to give sort of a briefing of what's rolled out, what the impacts have been that's been perceived, what barriers have been perceived, but that's always there whenever you want it.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think Chris was getting to what I mentioned earlier. I thought that we put something like that in the ADU ordinance or something. Katie, did you want to say something? I thought I jumped.
Nick knows. Nick
Somebody,
knows.
everybody wants to talk. Nick, go ahead.
So what was put in the ordinance was a requirement for an annual report. And so that's something that we transmit to the council by whatever, middle of February every year, which we did last year, we did this year. Include some recommendations to change that code. So just like Mayor Mendenhall said, you have that queued up, you have it in your office already. So it's just a matter if you guys want to schedule something.
So we could do the same thing here, that we could ask for an annual report and then with recommendations of this could expand to somewhere else, but then knowing that that expansion to somewhere else would have to, it would be almost like an amendment to the ordinance, but that would have to go through the Planning Commission.
I think so, if I was following that correctly. But yeah, what we would ask is that what information do you want to include in the report? And frankly, it's going to be for the first year, it's going to be a pretty easy report. In fact, there may not be one because there may not be any new ones existing, but it's not nearly as so we're not missing the boat.
I'm pretty sure everyone was waiting on me and I apologize. There were dog situation, puppy needing to go out. Like it was a thing. So I apologize for that. Okay, so we could add the reporting requirement and that's where I think we're at right now. And bring this potentially back sooner rather than later. Any other thoughts for right this second?
I think we need probably some strong language about revisiting the geographic thing, not just annual report though, Madam Chair. I don't think that's going to come naturally. I think we're going to have to make that happen. So.
Okay. Noted.
Well, so Madam Chair, just so that we can have a goal to this, like I would ask one of my council members, colleagues, that if you're having concerns about this or reservations, would you make a straw poll so that we know where we're going?
If I can, Chris, I think with what Russell wrote down and the idea that we can at least do two of the things that addressed concerns without having to take this back to planning, and potentially, three of the things with the report, and potentially a fourth with adding some amount of language, whether it be a legislative intent. That might not clear everything, but we could maybe work with the attorney's office on some language that we could include. It seems like there's a kind of marching order to-do list that Russell listed off. Would that be accurate for those council members that had some concerns?
Can Russell read them again, please?
Madam Chair, these are the items I have. Okay. These are the items. Adopt the ordinance but include the following things. Include the following things. Have a management plan. Have a yearly review. Voice a need to expand the geographic equity. I've also got the idea about a buffer zone, you know, of requiring one per X number of feet, and to have business license enforcement as part of the as part of the ordinance.
Thank you, Russell. So I think with those sort of marching orders, we could come back and visit this. And it sounds like, and we'll talk with Nick in planning and the attorney's office with some of that added language. But again, I'd like to see this, not to put even more work on Nick and his team, but hopefully sooner rather than later to have another discussion with that added language, some of those added requirements in there.
Chair, just for clarification on the geographic equity question that Councilmember Johnston had, I thought what he meant was, if we're going to do this, let's do it citywide. Not just a thought, not that we'll review it in the future. That if we're going to do it now, let's just get it done now, citywide, instead of coming back, you know, in 10 years and see if we're going to allow this somewhere else.
No, I think that that's exactly his concern, and that would have to go back to the Planning Commission. And I think what I'm hearing from some of the other council members is we want to get at least something out there now with the intent to expand and amend after that amendment or expansion has gone through the Planning Commission.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I understand the expediency issue, and going back to the Planning Commission is probably not feasible to get this done right now, which is frustrating, but it's reality. My concern during the ADU discussion, and my first discussion in the council 5 years ago was with the mayor about ADUs and pushing hard, and I learned a lot from this, pushing hard to ensure that it was as close to citywide as possible. If we don't bind ourselves to have that intent and discussion, it's not going to come up naturally, because we're going to have, this is a big, you know, this is a tinderbox. We're going to go into single family residential districts. We're going to go into areas that haven't had this. And unless we are willing to say we're going to do that on a time frame, we're not going to do it. So I think I'm willing to go forward with it as is now with those things we've talked about. But I think we need to add a legislative intent that we have to make this an issue for us going forward. We have to bind ourselves to, in some ways, address this as a council.
Cindy?
Just a step beyond legislative intent might be just show your interest in it is for either the council or the mayor to go ahead and file the petition with planning so that your intent is very clear to make it citywide, if that's of interest. It's another tool.
Madam Mayor?
I hope that what you heard from Nick and from me about our clear intention to expand this across the city gives you any level of comfort that, you know, whether or not you do a legislative intent or some other binding language, we're doing this. When it comes to a citywide application, it's a more dense housing type than the ADU conversation that is about single family home neighborhoods and the zoning types that apply there. So I just want to be clear for the public that I don't think what we're talking about is rezoning single family homes to become shared multi-unit housing, but that there's absolutely areas throughout the city, south, north, east, and west, that would be great fits for this, and we want that.
Okay, I'm going to take one final comment. Oh, you guys are good. All right.
No. One final comment. Please. When I spoke earlier, what I want the public and all of us to understand, where I'm coming from, it's about us thinking about solutions to help our homeless populations. And the city does a lot, and we do, and we keep thinking and strategizing, allocating funds. We're trying everything we can, really. I mean, we have shown that over and over our commitment to help our homeless neighbors. Where I'm coming from is, as we go through this process, to provide another solution, to think about all the issues that may come along and how to solve those if they ever come along. So I'm trying to think of anticipation of issues that might happen. And maybe, we won't have any issues, but I just want to keep in mind that we need to also plan for those issues that may arise. And I would hope that we have things in place now so that we don't burden our different departments and our different city and staff, and also the neighborhoods with issues that we didn't plan for ahead of time, or didn't have a mechanism to mitigate. So that's where I'm coming from. Those are my final comments. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. We will follow up on this in a very timely manner. Okay, we're moving to our next lovely subject of zoning text amendment to increase building height limits in a portion of the GMU zone. This is a follow-up from several briefs and briefings. We have Russell Weeks again, Nick Norris, and Nick Norris's team. So I will turn it over to Russell, and then planning can take it away.
Okay, so Bobby, do you have that graphic that I sent you earlier today? So Madam Chair, the area we're talking about, and this is taken from the Salt Lake City Master Plan, the area we're talking about is that blank area on the lower left-hand side of the master plan. That it's that acreage that's across the street from the intermodal hub, and that is not shown as having been developed in any way. The group Stack Realty clearly has presented a proposal to increase building heights within that area, well, within a larger area that was included in the staff report. And that whole area is zoned as gateway mixed use right now. After the last council discussion in autumn 2020, the council and the administrative staff were asked to provide options. And we met on January 26th and came back with 4 options. And here they are. One option is to deny the petition and keep the zoning as it is. Another option is to adopt the ordinance that is proposed. The third option is to adopt the ordinance, but apply it only to the property that's owned or leased by Stack Realty. Or 4, adopt either the entire ordinance or limit the ordinance to the property owned by Stack Realty, but require the petitioner to either build affordable housing as part of the project or contribute to the city's housing trust fund, or negotiate with the RDA about allowing design guidelines around the Station Center neighborhood that the RDA has prepared, including extending Market Street mid-block. And the third part of that option is you could require them to do both. I thought that Stack was going to be here, but I don't see any of the of the officers or their representative in this in the audience, as it were. So that's where we are.
Okay.
So Russell, I think I was just admitted as a panelist. This is Doug
No.
Tim. There, I
Thank you.
believe, are other representatives of STAC, perhaps in the audience
Yes,
that
Stack
may
is
need to
there.
be promoted.
Stack is there.
Okay, okay. I
Thank
stand
you.
corrected then.
Thank you, Russell, for that. And before we get started, I just want to say thank you for the updated staff report. It was really helpful for me in getting a lot of that information, and so I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you.
With that, I see Molly on the screen. I don't know, Molly, if you or Nick are taking over at this point, or what you guys want to do. And I want to thank representatives from STAC for being here if council members have questions there. But I'll turn it over to planning.
I think this is really for us to have a discussion and answer questions from the council. So we don't have anything prepared.
Okie doke, then I will turn it over to the other council members. Council members? Thoughts? Questions? Okay. See, the second I am like, that's it, we don't need it. People raise their hand. It's like when you close the door, tell your kid you're leaving and close the door and they come running out after you. Darren, go ahead, and then we'll get to Andrew.
I mean, I think all of the options that Russell presented, the things are things I'm interested in. I don't necessarily need 100% of them or every single one of them. I definitely want to get affordable housing out of this area, and I think the incentive of additional heights in return for the affordable housing is important to me. So because of that, I do not want to apply the additional heights to the entire area without that affordable housing incentive bonus. But I think if we were to limit it to just the Stacks development parcel and then consider some of the other things and consider the affordable housing or whatever else, I would feel more comfortable going forward with it. But I definitely I don't want to apply to the whole thing with no affordable housing component to it. And I'm not sure exactly what the affordable housing thing looks like or how that would work. And I don't know if that was clarified, but that's where I'm at.
Okay, Andrew?
I agree with Darren. I don't think their intent is to build housing here, so I don't think building affordable housing makes sense. But I do like the idea of having the incentive for additional height to tie jobs to housing within the city as much as we can. I think there's some responsibility that we have to work with everyone to make sure that there is housing for jobs coming in some capacity. So whether it's a fund or some other creative way to go about this, I think Darren's right.
Madam Chair, I wanted to follow up in regards to that statement for affordable housing. Andrew's spot on. That's not what they're looking at currently at this project. But if they do look at that, I think that just throwing it out there isn't enough. We need to discuss what does that mean policy-wise? What does that mean if we're going to give them height on that, if they're going to do affordability? I'm saying in GMU, right? I mean, what does that mean for council members? Are you looking at square footage? You say this, or is it a dollar price that they put into the housing trust fund? That's something that we haven't discussed before. And I feel like I'm going to go back to the statement where I don't know how long we've been at this, Nick, Norris. How long has this one been going on? Can you tell me how long ago did this project start?
This is briefing number 5 on this. So this has been going on for as long as, I don't even know. I
Okay.
think we're in
July
years.
2020. Or excuse me, July 2019. Sorry.
Okay, I appreciate that, Andrew. So yeah, we're coming up on year 2, pretty close here. So, and I understand we've had pandemic and we've done this, but this is where I feel like we are seriously just dragging our feet and looking at this. And I'm more than willing and comfortable moving forward doing this, specifically tied to this property or the lease around it and looking at that. But moving forward, yeah, I mean, we discussed looking at this whole project moving forward, but we're dragging feet again. So
Aaron?
I just think it's also important to remember that there was a negative recommendation by planning staff and planning commission forward on this one. So it's a little bit different than other proposals where it was recommended that we approve it and we're dragging our feet. So I think there is a bit of a difference on that. So for us to overturn the planning commission and planning staff's recommendation,
I don't mean to go back and forth, Councilmember Mono, but I am, because I'm not talking specifically tied to this project. I'm talking about Station Center. So Station Center area was done a long time ago. We've had several projects come to the area. Here, you know, they've come and gone. We have one that is actually still here, surprisingly, 18 months later. So that's what I'm not specifically saying it to this project. I'm tying it to specific project areas that aren't getting anything. I mean, we discussed Granary, that hasn't had anything. It's coming to an end, right? So,
and I think that's fair. Thanks for that clarification.
When is it appropriate for the applicant to speak, or would you like us to wait until a certain period of time or jump in?
Andrew, if you'll give me a second to see if there's some other questions, it might be helpful if you wait a little bit.
Great.
If you may address other issues that can bring up once we get to that point. Thanks. Council members, are there other questions? Cindy, you popped on, so.
Just, sorry, so under your rules, specifically, the petitioner just has the one opportunity in the initial briefing. But if council members have questions, then you can ask the petitioner to respond, or you can get the council to waive the rule.
Thank you for that, Cindy. And to be fair, I don't think that we gave you an opportunity before questions or comments. So Andrew, I think we usually, it's 5 minutes. If you want to take 5 minutes to talk about the project a little bit, and then we'll go back to council members.
Okay. I don't know that we really need to talk about the project because I think that part's been covered, but maybe just addressing just a couple of the things that have been brought up so far. One is your Councilmember Johnston and Councilmember Rogers are right. We're not focused on housing on this particular site. We're focused on office. That's the primary driver. To the extent that there is a housing component, and of course we're willing to participate in the affordable housing effort, whatever that needs to be, or however that needs to be discussed. The second item on the Planning Commission recommendation, I think it's really important. We brought this up in kind of the previous discussions. That recommendation, and it's in the minutes, several members of the Planning Commission made reference that while they felt like it was an appropriate action to take to increase the height here, their hands were tied because they're the land use authority. They had to go off of what it was currently zoned as, not what they thought it should be in the future, but that it was in the council's hands to do that. So they were strictly kind of abiding by the book, not what they felt should be done. That's really all we had. I mean, there's the other points we've made multiple times in the past. This is a catalytic place. It needs to be something special. It needs to be dense next to the station. We got to take advantage of these unique locations. And we'll leave it to question and answer, I guess, at this point.
Thanks, Andrew. Darren, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was on the planning commission when this went through the planning commission, and that's not my exact memory. I remember expressing that this made sense, the additional heights made sense, but that doing it without certain things like additional public benefits or like requiring mixture of uses or making sure that the area developed in a way that was that would become a destination was more the reason why I remember not forwarding a positive recommendation. So I think it was more the how does this area, you know, does a office building with no housing in it and no retail, potentially maybe some retail, small retail, does that lead to the type of destination that I think Station Center can be? And I wasn't convinced that there was enough in the ordinance to ensure that.
Okay. Are there other thoughts on this, comments? I actually thought we'd have a lot more on this than y'all are talking. Okay, well, we will be putting this on a future agenda for action.
Madam Chair, I don't want to sound like a fool, but for the sake of clarity, which of the options are we going with?
I don't know, it's going to be a surprise the day we take a vote on it. Just kidding.
We'll just put them in the staff report, right, with options.
Oh, okay. Good to go then. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew, thanks for being with us. That probably didn't give you much clarity, but you'll hopefully have an answer of one way or another soon.
Surprise! We appreciate everybody's time. And Councilmember Romano, we agree with everything actually you just said. It should be everything you said. It should apply to the whole area, not just our acreage. But so thanks for everybody's time, and we'll look forward to the decision.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, where are we in this agenda? We are on agenda item number 5, which is a follow-up on the percent for art ordinance. So I believe we have Ben Lutke and Felicia here with us on that. Ben, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This is the second briefing, and the council is scheduled to take potential action on April 6th. At the January briefing, the council had several requested changes to the ordinance amendment, and the council also took a straw poll saying they supported the mayor's recommended budget for fiscal year 22, incorporating 1.5% for art as part of the CIP budget. Note that even with that higher level of annual funding for art maintenance, there will likely still be instances where either art repairs or replacement of an artwork will require more funding than this higher ongoing funding would cover. In those instances, the additional funding would come to the council in a budget amendment. Council Member Fowler met with the Economic Development Department and the Attorney's Office to discuss delegation of authority options for the annual amount of funding going to new art versus art maintenance. I'll provide a quick summary of the council requested changes, and I believe we have Director Collender, and I'm not sure if Felicia is also with us if the council has questions. The first change is on lines 62 and 65 of the draft ordinance. It adds an equity and inclusion statement. Lines 75 and 76 change from citizen to resident as a qualification to serve on the Art Design Board. Lines 123 to 126 clarifies that the Art Design Board's recommendations are to the mayor, and it requires notice to the council within 45 days if the mayor approves removing an artwork from the public collection. Lines 135 to 139 set a range of 10% to 20% for how much of the annual funding for art maintenance is provided in the annual budget as part of CIP. And this provides flexibility for the administration to request more funding for maintenance in some years than others. It also includes a report to the council identifying which artworks require maintenance and an estimated cost. So this will keep the council informed about how that higher funding is used each year. And the last change to the ordinance amendment is lines 162 to 164. This delays the effective date of the 1.5% higher level of funding and the annual report to the council until next year. And this is done in recognition that when the council votes next month, there's not much time between that vote and the mayor's recommended budget for the Department of Economic Development to prepare the report that would be required under this ordinance. Those are all the changes. Are there any questions?
And before I take questions, thank you, by the way. But before we take questions, I do want to clarify one thing, that while it says it delays the 1.5%, we're not suggesting that the recommendation not be 1.5%. We all took a straw poll on that. Everyone straw polled, yay, support the 1.5%. It's just in speaking with the attorney's office and how the ordinance would work, that if they're going to be combined, the report and the 1.5%, that it would make sense that for a year for the exact reasons that Ben said. But of course, we all took that straw poll of saying, if we support a 1.5% increase. Does that make sense to council members and everyone else? And Allison's on. Allison, I hope you're not driving.
I am not driving. I just one clarification, if I can. The way that we had drafted it was that the ordinance would become effective at the date that it's published, except for the reporting requirement would be delayed. And so, Ben, if that's different from your understanding or what we discussed, please let me know.
Then that might just be different from my understanding. So everyone can scratch what I just said and listen to Allison and Ben. Are there any questions on this ordinance? Okay, I see some thumbs up all around. That's great. We will put this on tentative. It is on next 2 weeks. It's in 2 weeks on that agenda, correct? April 6th. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Felicia and Allison, for meeting with me and their hard work on this, and look forward to this new revised ordinance.
Thanks, everybody, so much.
Okay, council members, I have a question for you now. We have somewhat caught up, which is awesome. So we are at, agenda item number 6, that is the budget amendment number 7, and it is 6:28. So we were scheduled for a dinner break at 6:25. Do you want to power through budget amendment number 7 and then take a break, or would you like to take a dinner break now and then come back for the other 1, 2, 3 agenda items? Also, we had anticipated a closed session during the dinner break, but we're going to move it. It's not as urgent as we thought, and so we're going to move that closed session to April 6th. So now, thoughts? If you want dinner now, thumbs up. I'm doing my own straw polls. Dinner now, thumbs up. All right. I've got 3 and then no votes. And so I will take that as we are taking a break. We will come back.
I just
Yeah,
might be eating my dinner when we come back because it's not here yet. So that's fine with me though.
okay. Let's be back here in at 30 minutes. Does that, or do you guys need 30 minutes? Okay, 30 minutes it is.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Capital City News. As we continue to celebrate Women's History Month, it's important to honor the women of our past as well as our present. There are many contributions women make in our community and around the world, especially right here in Salt Lake City. Take, for example, this Women 2020 mural by Jan Hayworth, a local artist who captured more than 250 women and their stories. It's on display here in downtown on 100 South. Come and check it out. On this week's episode, we hear from Salt Lake City Council member Ana Valdemoros, who reflects on the women's rights to vote and her journey as a political leader. And our History Minute is about Olive Woolley-Burt, teacher, journalist, and author who elevated women's history in her day-to-day work. Let's get started with our legislative update and look back.
At its March 16th meeting, the City Council received an update on federal funding that will help the city with pandemic-related issues, received informational updates on homelessness, affordable housing, gentrification, and racial equity in policing. They were briefed on potential changes to the city budget and held 6 public hearings and took action on a number of items. To learn more, visit slc.gov/council.
COVID-19 vaccinations are underway throughout Utah. Here in Salt Lake County, there's a phased approach for vaccinations based on age and eligibility. Information on who can get vaccinated and when is changing regularly. Starting this week, all Utahns over the age of 16 are eligible to sign up for a vaccine appointment. To stay informed, visit the Salt Lake County Health Department at slco.org/health or visit the state at coronavirus.utah.gov. Attention Salt Lake City businesses, the city's largest Funding Our Future voter-approved bond project, 300 West, will begin construction this spring. The project team is hosting a workshop for businesses along the corridor on April 6th. Attendees will learn more about when the project will begin, what the impacts are, the process to resolve problems, and how to get in contact with the team. If you are a business that wants to register for the workshop, please call 385-360-1313 or email saltlakeCityComms@gmail.com. To learn more, visit 300westslc.com. As we celebrate her story this Women's History Month, we sit down with Salt Lake City Council member Ana Valdemoros as she reflects back on her journey as a political and business leader within the community. She also talks about paving the way for the next generation. This month is Women's History Month, and here in Salt Lake City, we're not only just celebrating women in history, but we're also celebrating women in politics. And Sarah Young was one of the first women here in the nation to cast her ballot and to vote. And it happened to be right here in Utah. And as a woman in political office, take a moment to just reflect a little bit on the first woman to vote and what what does the right to vote mean to you? How amazing that was able to happen, and also how tragic that we are celebrating something so essential as the right to vote, as to have the same rights as men have. So I am very thankful for for the work and for the energy women before me, and especially Sarah Young, put at the time, and fought. I'm guessing like nail and teeth, right? Like, or nail and tooth, like fight for something so essential to involve women in the political process, in democracy, and really have our voices heard. And obviously, without her, a lot of women in politics and me wouldn't even be here. So, I'm extremely grateful for all that work that somebody else did before me, so I could have this opportunity. Now, looking even deeper, here at your story, you're the first woman of color to serve on the city council. How has your journey been like, and how did you get here? Well, first of all, I'm an immigrant, right? And so not only I'm amazed that that I was elected because of these layers that we have as immigrants, like these layers or barriers that we have to cross. And I'm extremely grateful that Salt Lake City, especially the District 4 voters, gave me a chance. And basically, I think looking back, it's because of the community involvement, because of the well-known showing up and really trying to do your best to help your community. And I think people valued that. People were able to see that it doesn't matter what accent or what color or what gender. I mean, somebody is generally interested in in helping the community. So the way I got involved was coming to the US, to go to the EU. I got a planning degree, and I was given the chance by another woman at Salt Lake City to be an intern in the Salt Lake City Planning Division / Community Development at the time. And I had a mentor there, and then I became friends with another mentor. She's my lifelong friend. We share this friend, you and I, Puna, very closely. And this is Meredith Lewis, another woman of color from the East Coast. She really took me under her wing. We were what you call it, like we're sitting next to each other, but she really helped me understand how our job was working, the things that were needed to be fixed in terms of equity, and then how to navigate the system. And that way, she's been my mentor, and then I've gotten other mentors as well after her when I moved on to NeighborWorks, another woman of color that took me under her wing and also taught me at other world of how to build communities and be involved. And so I really attribute, my path to at least 3 or 4 women in my life that encouraged me, that believed in me. And as I was building the businesses, as I was a city planner, as I was really involved, I was able to, to tell my story to District 4 voters and tell them, hey, I am a planner. I know what you're going through, and I think I have the desire and and hopefully the power to change certain things for our district. And Councilmember Valdemaros, just in closing now, if individuals want to stay connected with you, learn more about what you're doing, what you're up to with the city council, and just things happening out, in the business realm here in Salt Lake City, how can they stay connected? What's the best way to stay connected? The best way to stay connected, if you want to, if you would like to meet with me, or if you'd like to talk about politics or some business or policies as council member, you can reach me at ana.valdemoros@slcgov.com. I'm happy to meet. Obviously, we're meeting not in person, but through WebEx. And I'm happy to set up a half an hour, call or WebEx meeting, and we can talk about
anything related to city. Or you can find me, at Square Kitchen. You can find me at the Empanada Shop, squarekitchenslc.com or Argentina's Best slc.com, and that's how you can reach me for the business portion of it.
And now we go back in time for our History Minute.
Born in 1894, Olive Woolley published her first poem in the San Francisco Examiner in 1905 at the age of 9 years old. By 1913, she was teaching elementary school, and by 1918, she'd received her degree from the University of Utah. And in 1922, she married a fellow teacher. In 1927, though, Olive Woolley Burt's career took a turn. She took a job as the children's editor of the Salt Lake Tribune and kept that post until 1945 when she moved to the Deseret News, where she remained until her retirement in 1967. During that time and through the rest of her life, Burt became a prolific and famous writer. She wrote over 50 books for children and adults, though the most notable might be American Murder Ballads and Their Stories in 1958. It won a special Edgar Award in 1959. She was also the founding president of the League of Utah Writers, a group dedicated to promoting writing as a hobby and profession in the state of Utah. She worked tirelessly to help and inspire all of the writers of Utah for almost 50 years. She was particularly fond of writing children's books that illuminated stories of possibility to children with an aggressively progressive bent. One book, First Woman Editor Sarah J. Hale, tells the story of the first woman in the United States to be the editor of a magazine. Another, Black Women of Valor, brought positive stories of black history to white children who wouldn't otherwise hear them in times where racist attitudes ran rampant. Olive Woolley Burt passed away in 1981, writing to the very end, a staple of the Salt Lake City writing community.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Capital City News. We hope you continue to celebrate Women's History Month, not only throughout the month, but throughout the year. Thank you for joining us. Tune in next time to stay up to date on all the latest. For SLC TV, I'm Poonam Kumar. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Capital City News. As we continue to celebrate Women's History Month, it's important to honor the women of our past as well as our present. There are many contributions women make in our community and around the world, especially right here in Salt Lake City. Take, for example, this Women 2020 mural by Jan Hayward, a local artist who captured more than 250 women and their stories. It's on display here in downtown on 100 South. Come and check it out. On this week's episode, we hear from Salt Lake City Council member Ana Valdemoros, who reflects on the women's rights to vote and her journey as a political leader. And our History Minute is about Olive Woolley Burt, teacher, journalist, and author who elevated women's history in her day-to-day work. Let's get started with our legislative update and look back.
At its March 16th meeting, the City Council received an update on federal funding that will help the city with pandemic-related issues, received informational updates on homelessness, affordable housing, gentrification, and racial equity in policing. They were briefed on potential changes to the city budget and held 6 public hearings and took action on a number of items. To learn more, visit slc.gov/council.
COVID-19 vaccinations are underway throughout Utah. Here in Salt Lake County, there's a phased approach for vaccinations based on age and eligibility. Information on who can get vaccinated and when is changing regularly. Starting this week, all Utahns over the age of 16 are eligible to sign up for a vaccine appointment. To stay informed, visit the Salt Lake County Health Department at slco.org/health or visit the state at coronavirus.utah.gov. Attention Salt Lake City businesses, the city's largest Funding Our Future voter-approved bond project, 300 West, will begin construction this spring. The project team is hosting a workshop for businesses along the corridor on April 6th. Attendees will learn more about when the project will begin, what the impacts are, the process to resolve problems, and how to get in contact with the team. If you are a business that wants to register for the workshop, please call 385-360-1313 or email saltlakecitycoms@gmail.com. To learn more, visit 300westslc.com. As we celebrate her story this Women's History Month, we sit down with Salt Lake City Council member Ana Valdemoros as she reflects back on her journey as a political and business leader within the community. She also talks about paving the way for the next generation. This month is Women's History Month, and here in Salt Lake City, we're not only just celebrating women in history, but we're also celebrating women in politics. And Sarah Young was one of the first women here in the nation to cast her ballot and to vote. And it happened to be right here in Utah. And as a woman in political office, take a moment to just reflect a little bit on the first woman to vote and what does the right to vote mean to you? How amazing that was able to happen. And also how tragic that we are celebrating something so essential as, you know, the right to vote, as you know, to have the same rights as men have. So I am very thankful for, you know, for the work and for the energy, you know, women before me, and especially Sarah Young, put at the time, you know, and fought. I'm guessing like nail and teeth, right? Like, or nail and tooth, like fight for something so essential to involve women in the political process, in democracy, and really have our voices heard. And obviously, without her, a lot of women in politics and me wouldn't even be here. So, you know, I'm extremely grateful for all that work that somebody else did before me, so I could have this opportunity. Now, looking even deeper, you know, here at your story, you're the first woman of color to serve on the city council. You know, how has your journey been like, and how did you get here? Well, first of all, I'm an immigrant, right? And so not only I'm amazed that, you know, that I was elected because of, you know, because of these layers that we have as immigrants, like these layers of barriers that we have to cross. And I'm extremely grateful that Salt Lake City, especially the District 4 voters, you know, gave me a chance. And basically, I think looking back, it's because of the community involvement, because of, you know, the well-known showing up and really trying to do your best to help your community. And I think people valued that. People were able to see that it doesn't matter what accent or what color or what gender. I mean, somebody is generally interested in, you know, in helping the community. So the way I got involved was coming to the US, to go to the EU. I got a planning degree, and I was given the chance by another woman at Salt Lake City to be an intern in the Salt Lake City Planning Division / Community Development at the time. And I had a mentor there, and then I became friends with another mentor. She's my lifelong friend. We share this friend, you and I, Puna, very closely. And this is Meredith Lewis, another woman of color from the East Coast. She really took me under her wing. We were sitting next to each other, but she really, helped me understand, how our job was working, the things that were needed to be fixed in terms of equity, and then how, to navigate the system. And that way, she's been my mentor, and then I've gotten other mentors as well after her when I moved on to NeighborWorks, another woman of color that took me under her wing and also taught me other world of how to build communities and be involved. And so I really attribute, my path to at least 3 or 4 women in my life that encouraged me, that believed in me. And as I was building the businesses, as I was a city planner, as I was really involved, that was I was able to, to tell my story to District 4 voters and tell them, hey, I am a planner. I know what you're going through, and I think I have the desire and, and hopefully the power to change certain things for our district. And Councilmember Valdemaros, just in closing now, if individuals want to stay connected with you, learn more about what you're doing, what you're up to with the city council, and just things happening out, in the business realm here in Salt Lake City, how can they stay connected? What's the best way to stay connected? The best way to stay connected, well, if you want to, if you would like to meet with me, or if you'd like to talk about politics or some business or policies as council member, you can reach me at ana.valdemoros@slcgov.com. I'm happy to meet. Obviously, we're meeting not in person, but through WebEx. And I'm happy to set up a half an hour, call or WebEx meeting, and we can talk about anything related to city. You can find me, at Square Kitchen. You can find me at the Empanada Shop, squarekitchenslc.com, or Argentina's Best slc.com. And that's how you can reach me for the business portion of it. And now we go back in time for our History Minute.
Born in 1894, Olive Woolley published her first poem in the San Francisco Examiner in 1905 at the age of 9 years old. By 1913, she was teaching elementary school, and by 1918, she'd received her degree from the University of Utah. And in 1922, she married a fellow teacher. In 1927, though, Olive Woolley Burt's career took a turn. She took a job as the children's editor of the Salt Lake Tribune and kept that post until 1945, when she moved to the Deseret News, where she remained until her retirement in 1967. During that time and through the rest of her life, Burt became a prolific and famous writer. She wrote over 50 books for children and adults, though the most notable might be American Murder Ballads and Their Stories in 1958. It won a special Edgar Award in 1959. She was also the founding president of the League of Utah Writers, a group dedicated to promoting writing as a hobby and profession in the state of Utah. She worked tirelessly to help and inspire all of the writers of Utah for almost 50 years. She was particularly fond of writing children's books that illuminated stories of possibility to children with an aggressively progressive bent. One book, First Woman Editor Sarah J. Hale, tells the story of the first woman in the United States to be the editor of a magazine. Another, Black Women of Valor, brought positive stories of black history to white children who wouldn't otherwise hear them in times where racist attitudes ran rampant. Olive Woolley Burt passed away in 1981, writing to the very end, a staple of the Salt Lake City writing community.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Capital City News. We hope you continue to celebrate Women's History Month, not only throughout the month, but throughout the year. Thank you for joining us. Tune in next time to stay up to date on all the latest. For SLC TV, I'm Poonam Kumar. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Capital City News. As we continue to celebrate
assuming we are good. John, are we good with you? Excellent. Okay. We are now on to agenda item number 6. Welcome back, everyone, by the way. I hope you got some food or at least got to walk around a little bit, which is what I did, little break. On agenda item number 6, which is our budget amendment number 7. So I will turn the time over to Ben. And then of course we have Mary Beth and John from the finance department. So we will turn it to Ben. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This is the second briefing for budget amendment number 7. A public hearing is scheduled for April 6th. I'm going to jump to the one urgent item to make sure we get to it tonight. It's A19, the central plant boiler replacements. It's a request for $1 million from fund balance. The primary boiler for the Civic campus failed a decade earlier than expected after rusted out tubes caused a fuel leak. The rust was not visible or accessible. The secondary boiler is in poor condition and could also fail. The central plant provides heat from October to May at the City and County Building, the main library, the Public Safety Building, and the Leonardo. Unfortunately, the boilers are no longer under warranty. The manufacturer has declared bankruptcy, so parts are not available, and the cause of the failure is not covered by insurance. The replacement boilers will have a different design that is easier to maintain, a 30-year useful life, and a 10-year warranty. The estimated delivery and installation is several months, which is about how long it is from now until October. The total cost to replace the boilers is $2.5 million, but the administration is only requesting $1 million. The $1.5 million difference will be funded by delaying 14 facility projects that the council approved in fiscal year 21 CIP. These are mostly roof replacements and exhaust fan replacements at several fire stations. There are also improvements at Smith's Ballpark and Sorensen Center that would be delayed. The full list of these delayed facility projects is on the last page of the administration's transmittal. I also want to point out that Rocky Mountain Power is switching to a new energy delivery system, which requires replacing the main power transformer at the central plant. This is also estimated to cost $2.5 million. The upgrade to the transformers must be done by 2024. There is a straw poll and a policy question for the council. The straw poll would be if the council supports this funding approach to replace the boilers by delaying other facility projects. It would allow the administration to place the order, but payment could not be made until this budget amendment is formally adopted. The additional month will help ensure the replacement boilers are operational by October. The policy question is how to improve capital planning processes, especially for expensive projects, which are known years in advance. Projects that are over $2 million are difficult to fund in the city's existing competitive CIP process.
Sorry, it's having trouble unmuting. Questions, comments, thoughts, council members? Dan?
Alone?
I was just wondering, is the 87 ARA available for this project? And can that refund after we initiate the purchase or PO on these, on the boiler and the transformers?
The 87 million from the American Rescue Plan is not expected to be delivered for, I think, a couple more months. If it could be used to reimburse fund balance, I don't know if we have guidance from Treasury to clearly answer that yet, but I'll defer to Mary Beth. She probably knows the latest info better than I do.
No, I think, Ben, you are correct. We haven't received definitive United States Treasury guidelines at this point. It could replace fund balance once we get those guidelines.
Okay, I just throw that out because I'm, of course, all for funding it and doing a straw poll now so we can make sure that we get it by October.
And that's something staff will keep in mind when we do receive the first of the 2 payments from the American Rescue Plan.
Darren?
Like, we have no choice, right? The boiler does not work. So there's no heat for those 4 buildings. Is that correct? Or is it like it could go for another year? But
the secondary boiler is still providing heat, but it is in a similar poor condition. And by poor condition, I mean it could have an accident and cause a fuel leak, which is an explosion risk.
Okay.
So we don't want to keep that going.
It doesn't seem like we have a choice to me.
I mean, I think the only other question I would have is the policy question of delaying certain projects to fully fund this, because it's out right now, it's just coming out of the general fund, but it sounds like the idea, so that we're not continuing to take from the general fund, is to delay some of these projects and use allocated funds that were allocated to those projects to this. And I guess my question is there any other option? Or would it just have to come out of the general fund if we don't delay the projects?
You're correct, Madam Chair. The option is to fully pay the $2.5 million from fund balance.
And Ben, can you perhaps remind us of the projects at the ballpark and at the Sorensen Center that would be delayed by this?
I know it's several fire stations, but I have to look up those 2. I know where to look, but give me a second.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And while I'm looking it up, the delayed projects at the fire stations are roof replacements and exhaust fan replacements. The delayed projects at the ballpark are repairing stairways, replacing locks and doorknobs. The Sorensen Multicultural Center delayed projects are replacing a parking lot, a partial roof replacement, and also replacing an HVAC system.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
These are delayed though. They will be done just a year later, or would we have to then, those projects would have to go through the same competitive CIP process to be funded ever? Because I mean, a fire station sounds pretty important also.
It's the latter, Councilmember Mono. The council would need to provide new funding in CIP next fiscal year for these facility improvements.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I'm shaking my head, not because I don't obviously want to approve the boiler stuff, boiler, but how do we make sure that we're not just delaying these other projects that, one, we know the ballpark has in the past could potentially create a liability of somebody getting hurt if we're not careful of the facility. I mean, I think that could happen in any of our facilities, but then to Councilmember Mano's point that we're not just putting these projects back into the queue. And if it's an HVAC system in Sorensen, are we going to come back in 2 years from now with the same emergency problem that we are having in other places because of deferred maintenance? I don't know if anybody has the answer to that. Lorna, you might.
Hi, Council Chair. Thank you, Council. And thanks for the good questions. These are the questions that we struggle with every day on these decisions. When we put forward our request for CIP, we put together projects that are next on the list, knowing that something might break and we're going to have to shuffle. So we are often pushing projects back, and that is exactly what we would do here. In the meantime, we look for any and all other sources of funding, and we are going through the process of looking at potential ARA projects that could be taken off our deferred list. And we have always put together large projects in what we call a shovel-ready list. So in case any other funding comes up for large projects. So we're constantly reworking those plans, but there really is no mechanism for very large capital projects right now. As Ben mentioned, the CDCIP is very frustrated with that. So this is something we hope not to come back for emergency budget amendments, but it's almost the only method we have for funding large unexpected repairs. And then we have very many large expected repairs that we haven't been able to fund either. I know that's not a good answer for you. It's just the reality of what we're dealing with right now.
Madam Chair. I think she's muted. All right, I'll ask my question anyway. You mentioned, Lorna, you mentioned ARA. Is there some belief that there'd be wide enough discretion in the guidance from the feds about that money that some things could be included? Is that what I'm referring from that comment, or is that something different?
No, that is right. Mary Beth is still researching all of the requirements of ARA. So we prepared lists of things in case they are eligible for that funding. And we're certainly looking at items that are that would provide the most community benefit and have an equity component to them and can alleviate or provide more services for residents who have been most impacted. But those are decisions that I believe Mary Beth is still working on, or guidelines, and we're just being prepared for those.
Okay. And maybe one other question. It sounds like this is a pretty typical process of just what we fund first. And it sounds like the boilers sound like the biggest emergency of many emergencies. Is that accurate?
That's right. We don't have any other big emergencies facing us right now. And what happened on this one is facilities was doing good preventive maintenance in the boiler room and noticed some problems with an auxiliary system. It knocked off a chunk of scale and rust, which then caused the pipe to leak through. So these things happen even in the course of the best preventive maintenance. It's the only emergency we have, but we have plenty of other projects that are queued up.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would take a lot of heart in the possibility of using some federal stimulus funds. I think we have to be judicious and long-term thinking about those, obviously, but I'd be comfortable moving forward with this plan. Either way, it comes out of fund balance, one way or the other. I think it's up to us to sort of hold ourselves to ensuring that we get to those other projects this next year.
Council members, any other questions? Yeah, I understand boilers pretty well. And I understand those heat exchangers too. They're very temperamental. So it's an expensive project, but it also heats in a lot of buildings. So appreciate that. Are there any other questions for this item? No. Okay, Ben.
There is the question of a straw poll to allow the administration to place the order. This would allow an additional month to make sure the boilers are received and installed by October.
Okay, council members, we're going to go off that straw poll. Do you support this budget amendment? All thumbs up. Councilmember Mono, Councilmember Valdemaros. That looks good. We've got 6 with Councilmember Fowler rebooting her computer. So
I'm back.
well, welcome
Madam
back.
Chair.
That thumbs up, Madam Chair. Okay, it's 7.
So that's a unanimous straw poll. Madam Chair, being cognizant of time, that was the only urgent item. I'm happy to go through the remaining items in the budget amendment now, at the end of the night, or on April 6th. What's your preference?
I think I know it's going to be long, but I just really am trying not to just continue pushing things. So I would like to go through the rest of the budget amendment. We can make it quick unless there's issues.
I'll shorten my information for each item. That takes us to A9. This is a budget neutral request to move 2 full-time employees from the Community and Neighborhoods Department to the Information Management Services Department. The 2 employees work in GIS, Geographic Information System, that is mapping technology, and this would centralize those functions in a GIS division within IMS. The city has been moving to centralize these technology functions in one place, so it's more efficient. And another example is the innovations team that you approved in the last budget amendment. They provide services to every city department. A10 is also budget neutral. As part of the city's annual financial audit, the city was notified it needs to budget and account for city tax revenue generated within the boundaries of the inland port. The tax revenue is dispersed directly to the inland port. It does not come to the city. This is a reporting and compliance matter, which is why it's budget neutral. A11 is a request for $4.9 million from fund balance for one-time employee bonuses. In the fiscal year 21 annual budget, the council decided to not provide ongoing salary increases for all city employees because of the financial uncertainty facing the city. The administration met with the fire and AFSCME labor unions mid-year when the financial uncertainty was clearer. They're proposing a $2,000 one-time bonus to employees in the fire union and the AFSCME union. All other city employees would receive $500. Items A13, 14, and 15 are 4 existing contracts for voluntary police officer overtime. The administration is requesting that the payments be recognized in the police department budget. I'll go through the contracts quickly. The first 2 are with Salt Lake County. The first was for security services at the Red Lion Hotel, which acted as a quarantine facility. It was $24,000 for 1 month of overtime, 16 hours per day, December and January. The second contract, also with the county, was for education and enforcement of the county's public order on the pandemic inside parks. It was for almost $195,000, 12-hour shifts per day for 6 months, June to January. The next contract was $24,000 with the Department of Natural Resources, the State Department. It was for patrols on or within 250 yards of the Jordan River within the city. And it's a 2-year, April 2019 to April 2021 term. The last contract was with the U.S. Marshal's Office for a short-term joint operation. It was almost $35,000, half of which was for equipment, and 427 hours of overtime in total. There's one policy question, if the council would like to consider, about how voluntary overtime for the city's priority needs is balanced with voluntary overtime opportunities with outside entities, especially while the police department is experiencing reduced staffing levels.
Council members? Okay, keep going, Ben.
That takes us to A16, a request for $241,000 from fund balance for additional staffing costs department. These were not covered by CARES Act funding earlier in the fiscal year. Specifically, $57,000 in emergency response pandemic leave and $184,000 in workers' compensation. These costs are eligible for FEMA reimbursement, but it's unclear when that reimbursement would be received. A17 is a request for $537,000 from fund balance for costs the police department incurred during protests and free speech events over the last 9 months. Specifically, $326,000 for overtime, $73,000 for workers' compensation, and $137,000 for proactive patrols that were put in place to maintain order in case of protests during the presidential inauguration. A18 is a request to recognize a larger than expected reimbursement, I wish I could say that more often, for the vice presidential debate. Originally, the city was expecting $19,000 of reimbursement. After seeking full reimbursement from the University of Utah, the city is now receiving 10 times as much, a $209,000 reimbursement. Next is D3.
Ben, sorry, Madam Chair. On that one, is that the full amount, 209,000, or is that still a portion of the total cost?
I'll defer to Mary Beth or John. I know we requested full reimbursement. I'm not sure if that is a true 100% reimbursement.
It's full reimbursement for the services that the university requested, not full reimbursement for the entire vice president's debate, right? So anything inside Salt Lake City was not reimbursed, but moving them back and forth, that was all reimbursed.
Thank you.
Item D3 is a housekeeping adjustment, but I thought it was important to bring to the council's attention. In the fiscal year 21 annual budget, 2 fiscal years of funding for the social workers program was moved from the police department to non-departmental, which was incorrect. It should have been 1 fiscal year. This item would correct that mistake by transferring the difference from non-departmental back to the police department. If this is not done, it risks the police department being short for the year. Item D5 is a request for $800,000 for startup costs or the Trips to Transit pilot program. You can see attachment 7 has an infographic about this proposed pilot. It would provide on-demand service connecting residents, visitors, and commuters between bus and tracks routes and areas of the city that are largely residential. This would help with the first mile, last mile challenge in transportation. The areas of the city it would focus on are Rose Park, Fair Park, Poplar Grove, Glendale, the Upper Avenues, and the East Bench. UTA has piloted a similar service in Southwest Salt Lake County. It proved popular and it was more cost-effective than bus service. This pilot would be done in collaboration with UTA. The goal is to launch in August of this year in tandem with the Change Day. The funding, $800,000, is only for startup costs. An additional $1 million would come to the council as part of the fiscal year 22 annual budget request. The transit route account has $700,000 available to spend. The council created a transit holding account that has $1.9 million. The holding account was created because budgets in fiscal year 20 and again in fiscal year 21 were higher than the contract costs for providing frequent bus service in partnership with UTA. The request is to use the full $700,000 in the transit account and $100,000 from the holding account. Two more items. D10 is a request to use $520,000 from the Tree Removal Mitigation Fund. This will use most of the funding in that account. It will provide additional tree planting efforts in park strips, parks, and other city property. When a tree has to be removed for construction or development, and that tree is on public property, a fee is paid into this account. And the last item is E1. Since the anniversary of the March 18th, 2020 earthquake just passed, we wanted to take a moment to point out the city is hoping to receive the next round of FEMA funding for Fix the Bricks. $3.7 million to meet this ongoing community need. It would allow 260 city residents to have seismic improvements to their homes. It's typically a remodel or a roof replacement, and it's targeted to unreinforced masonry structures. Those are all the items, Madam Chair.
Awesome, thank you, Ben. Council members, do we have questions, comments, anything? I don't see any hands. So we have this scheduled for public comment on Tuesday, April 6th, and tentative council action on Tuesday, April 20th. Thank you, Ben. Thanks for the information and getting us through that. We are on agenda item number 8, which is our Citizens Compensation Advisory Committee report. So I'm looking around my Zoom, my camera, my computer. We have David Salazar here. I believe Deb may be here. Yep, Deb's here. David is with is our compensation program manager. Deb Alexander, our HR director. Eleanor Jackson, classification and compensation analyst. And then several CCAC members, including Jeff Worthington, who is the CCAC chair. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Dave. David, thank you, David.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to come before you, council members. We get to do this about once a year, but this is, of course, a significant report. We actually have 2 reports to deliver to you today, and I know that time is short, so we want to be respectful of that. But to start off tonight, would actually like to introduce Kim Taylor, who is with Pay Factors, recently merged with another company, so they will soon to be Pay Scale. Kim has worked with us to provide us with an audit on our internal equity. So this is, of course, a topic of interest to all of you, to the administration, and to the HR department and the city as a whole. So she's going to first present, and then we'll follow that up with the presentation by Jeff Worthington, who's the chair of the Citizens Compensation Advisory Committee, along with Marlene Sloan, who is part of that committee. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Kim.
Thanks so much, David. Everyone, thank you for having me here today. As David mentioned, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of our pay equity project. I'm sharing a very brief overview of the project that we undertook. The purpose of this project was to review your internal pay rates that are paid to the employees of Salt Lake City to make sure that there were no discrepancies that were adversely impacting a protected class, namely discrepancies based on gender, age, or ethnicity. As you can see here, this wasn't the first time the city has undergone a study like this. There's been some ongoing review of employee pay historically, and there have been some high-level reviews specifically looking for discrepancies, but this was the first in-depth third-party objective audit that we undertook. The first step in an audit like this is to determine the employees that are going to be included. And to that extent, we first divided the employee base of Salt Lake City into two populations, the first being the Department of Airports, and the second being the general population outside of the Department of Airports. And the logic behind this division was twofold. The first being our concern that the Department of Airports has traditionally been more competitive than the rest of the city with respect to compensation. And the second being that until around 2017 or so, the Department of Airport salaries had been administered based on employee performance, whereas across the general population, you take a bit more of a tenure-based approach. So because employee salaries have been administered in two different ways, we wanted to separate the two employee populations for the purposes of this analysis. Secondly, we did exclude a few groups of employees from the analysis entirely. You can see those listed here, but the key exclusions were your union population. Any employees that are subject to collective bargaining units have their rates predetermined by those agreements and are not subject to any level of discretion in their individual salary rates. We also excluded temporary or seasonal employees or employees that were in jobs where there was no variability in pay. So for example, some of your judges, some of your ranked fire or police positions. As with those union employees, because there's no variability in pay, there are no discrepancies to be investigated. There are three basic steps that we undertook to perform this analysis. The first was a simple pay comparison, which, as it sounds, is simply an average of salaries paid to employees in any given group. So you can see here, we took the general employee population and simply averaged out the pay rates that were paid to male employees versus female, employees over the age of 40 versus under the age of 40, or employees that were Caucasian versus non-Caucasian. And then we did the same across that Department of Airports population. And you can see the variances noted here. These are reflective of dollars per hour. And so we would interpret this as saying that across the general employee population as a whole, the average male employee is paid $3.21 an hour more than the average female employee. Likewise, the average employee over the age of 40 is paid $6.88 an hour more than the average employee under the age of 40. And you can see that those hold true across all demographic groupings and both the general employee population and the Department of Airports. Now, while this information is interesting, it's not particularly useful. It doesn't control for any of the employee characteristics that we generally accept as impacting pay. It's sometimes referred to as a headline pay gap because you'll hear this in the news when you read the statistics about an employee, a female employee paid 80 cents on the dollar compared to a male cohort. And so it's good to measure, but it doesn't really give you a sense of how the pay is being administered in your organization. Like we mentioned, it doesn't account for level of organization, differences in job responsibility, organizational tenure, or overall work experience. So to control for those variables and get a true sense of the pay as it exists in your organization, we need to conduct a regression analysis. And that was the second step in our audit. The regression analysis models the relationship between those employee variables, level, performance, tenure, and pay. It also not only measures the size of the relationship, it doesn't only tell us the $3.21 gap, for example, but it also tells you the strength and the significance. But most importantly, it allows us to incorporate multiple variables simultaneously so that we can evaluate the relationship between pay and all of the other employee characteristics at the same time. After using regression analysis to control for grade and tenure, we can see from the figures here that the relationship between gender and pay has actually been reversed. If you look at these charts below, the uncontrolled gap, where we saw that men in your general employee population were making $3.21 an hour more than women, actually falls to negative $1.64 when you control for factors like tenure, grade level within the organization. So we can see once we control for those other variables, being male is actually associated with $1.64 less an hour than being female. The same is true across the Department of Airports. This gap falls from $4.96 an hour in favor of the male employee to $1.70 an hour in favor of the female employee. The impact of ethnicity and the impact of age on employee pay has been substantially reduced. When we look at the uncontrolled employees being over the age of 40, it's almost $7 an hour more, but that falls to $1.31 when we control for their position in the organization. One thing that's important to note based on the statistical analysis is that the only one of these figures that is statistically significant is this pay gap between male and female employees across the general population. Any of these other figures, while they might seem like large gaps, are not significant enough to be attributed to the employee demographic grouping that we're considering. It could simply just be a function of variability in pay in general. Now, as useful as the regression analysis is in giving us a look at the systematic issues that might exist within your organization, they don't necessarily tell us how to fix any specific discrepancies between individual employees. They don't tell us what employees might need pay increases to align them to counterparts, for example. And so the third and final step, and probably the most exhaustive step in any employee pay equity audit, is what we call an employee cohort analysis. And in this phase, we divide your employee populations further beyond just the Department of Airports and general population groupings that we initially started with, and we identify subgroupings within each of those populations where employees are performing the same or substantially equal work. So our first step to make those divisions was to consider organizational grade, which we're using as a proxy for equal experience and scope of responsibility. Our assumption here was that employees assigned to the same grade within the Salt Lake City's existing salary structure were probably fairly comparable in terms of scope of responsibility and job performed. We then did further subdivide based on the presence or absence of managerial duties because we think that's a key component, a key driver of the complexity of a person's job. Once we had those employee cohorts divided, the compensation team at Salt Lake City and the team here at Pay Factors passed notes back and forth. We manually reviewed the employee pay records for every employee assigned to any given cohort to identify potential inequities that we felt might need additional review. We presented these inequities to the Salt Lake City compensation team for further research, and the team there went back to resumes, hiring histories, line managers to get additional detail on any employee characteristics that were maybe not captured in the original data set that we were provided for the initial analysis. After several iterations of this employee cohort analysis, we were able to justify all but 3 of the initial 522 employee pay discrepancies that we flagged. So just to clarify, in the first pass, we flagged 522 employees as potentially earning a pay level that was inequitable compared to someone in a similar role. But after additional review and research of those 522 discrepancies, all but 3 were ultimately explainable based on some employee characteristic that we just hadn't been privy to during the original analysis. So in all, the total cost of the recommended increases to solve those remaining 3 discrepancies was a total of $4.46 per hour. You can see that that's split across the general employee population and the Department of Airports. As a result of this study, we did also find 4 additional employees whose pay we flagged for future review and adjustment, but that was simply because they were somewhat low in their range competitively and was not necessarily a result of an internal equity concern. Can I answer any questions for anyone about this study?
Council members, I can't see you, so just speak up if you have questions. Now I can see you all. I don't hear anyone with questions. So Kimberly, I'd like to say thank you for this in-depth analysis and look at how we're paying employees. I think reviewing 522 resumes and discrepancies is pretty remarkable and quite a feat. So I appreciate that. I guess my question would be, in your opinion, and in the research that you have done, and if this is outside of the scope of what you want to comment on, I'm totally okay with that. Are there policies that the council or the administration should be looking at to ensure that we don't have continued? Luckily, it seems like the pay discrepancies kind of weren't based necessarily on, at least all of them were not based on policy, but to ensure this that we continue to be as equitable as possible. Is there anything that you found through your research that we should maybe consider as a policy?
I actually think that a lot of what you're doing internally is why this study went so well. That, you know, just for perspective, those 3 discrepancies, that's very, very good. When I do these studies before, it's not uncommon that we find a lot more that needs to be resolved. And I think the reason that this one turned out so well is because of the work that the compensation team does internally. You know, my understanding is that they vet every employee pay action, both new hires and ongoing. And I think that just that level of oversight prevents these inequities from happening in the first place.
Great, that's good to hear. Andrew.
Yeah, can you put that last slide into context for us, the $4 per hour discrepancy? If I just annualize that, $8,000, but that's not what that means. Can I put that in context for us? Because if we want to make that gap, fix that gap, what's the economic, the amount we're talking about here?
Sure. So what we were looking at, we were comparing employees record by record to all the other employees that were in the same or similar job as them, that were also comparable in terms of tenure, background experience, overall work experience. And what we found were that there were these 3 employees who could be exactly compared to someone else in the organization who is very similar to them in terms of their time with Salt Lake City, the job that they fill currently, their overall work experience. And there was nothing else to distinguish those 2 employees from each other except for some protected class issues. One was male, one was female, for example. One was Caucasian, one was not Caucasian. But there was, in addition to that demographic difference, there was a pay difference. And without being able to explain away what's driving that pay difference, we need to resolve that gap so that there isn't a perception that we're paying a woman less than a man who's doing similar work as her, or vice versa. Does that help? And
How many
so then also
positions is that,
closing that
does,
gap.
how many positions does that represent? One position? Or three, or?
Employees, 3 employees. I believe they were in 2 different positions.
So between all 3 employees, it's a $4 an hour gap that needs to be
That's
fixed?
right. That's right. The gaps are very small.
Seriously?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
We're that good, council member.
No, I was like, that can't be right. That can't be $4 an hour for a year is the gap, but evidently it is. Right now? Okay. Thank you. Huh.
Aaron?
Does the analysis show if employees are paid too much or only if employees are paid too little?
So actually, all we were looking at here was not so much whether they were paid too much or too little, but whether they were paid similarly to other employees. The concept of too much or too little is more of an external market study. This was really internally focused.
The 4 employees or 3 employees were all paid below what other people within their same job description, where it doesn't show if someone's paid way above other people on their job description.
Well, you do tend to look at that to see, and the law is pretty clear that when you find someone who's paid higher than everyone else who's performing similar work, you can't bring that person down. You have to close the gap by increasing the lower paid employees. So that's why the focus is on bringing people up as opposed to reducing down people who are overpaid.
Any other questions for Kimberly? Thank you again, Kimberly, for joining us and for presenting this and for your work with the city. I appreciate when Andrew's stunned like that. No, I'm just kidding. Madam Mayor?
Thanks for this time, and Kimberly, thank you so much. This is the kind of work we want to keep doing. And in our meeting earlier today, before the council meeting, we talked about how Kimberly, in working with our HR staff, have equipped them with the formulas to be able to kind of keep this analysis churning to some extent internally. And I just want the council to know that it's my intention that we continue to do this on a more regular basis and take this deep dive of considering equity within Salt Lake City Corporation for our non-represented employees.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With that, again, thank you, Kimberly, for your time. I will turn the time over, I believe, to Jeff Worthington for our CCAC report.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Here we go. Okay, good, thumbs up. Madam Chair and council members, I want to thank you for this opportunity to present our report to you tonight. I'll start out by acknowledging everybody that's on our committee, because everybody had a part in this. We're just the reporting. There was myself as chair, Ray Shelble as vice chair, Brandon Dew, Jana Bake, Jeff Herring, Marlene Sloan, who's here with us tonight, and Mike Terry. And I want to give them a big thank you for their hard work, and also the assistance of David Salazar and Eleanor Jackson. They were a big help on this. So I appreciate their involvement, helping us to craft this. I'll start out by saying that our report this year is very similar to last year, being as we went through the COVID environment, but actually with better results. I think you'll hear through the report. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start out covering the first 2 sections of our report, and then I will turn the time over to Marlene, who will cover the next 2 sections. So if you'd like to follow along, section 1 is the impact of COVID-19 on salary budgets. And historically, this committee has relied upon data obtained from employer salary budget surveys conducted by World at Work. That's the company that we worked with on figuring out our numbers. And this includes amounts of employee pay increases that we just got through discussing. However, the extraordinary circumstances brought on by the global pandemic, various reports and articles, including data and information, were provided by the city's human resources management staff to inform the committee about the impact of COVID-19 on salary budgets. And it's interesting to note that early on, surveys that were taken between 2020 and 2021, surveys conducted by World at Work showed that the average total salary increase budget for all U.S. employers was projected to be 3%. Pretty much across the board, as you can see with the box that's in blue and white, shows that the 3% was actually a solid number that they were planning on across the board. However, as the pandemic spread across around the world and our nation, other surveys, including the Pay Factor salary budget survey, asked participants how they plan to modify their salary increase budgets in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you look at the chart below that, a majority, 56%, indicated that their 2020 salary increase had already been or would be implemented as planned. Results show a significant number who either remained undecided, which was 19%, or chose to eliminate increases, which was 16%, or reduce salary budgets, was 8%. So as you can see, the majority stuck with their guns and stuck with the 3% increase. The Society for Human Resource Management provided further evidence of negative economic effect of the COVID-19 that had on the employers, noting that the pandemic had forced nearly half of organizations to reevaluate their salary increase plans for 2021. In an article published in November of 2020, the Society for Human Resource Management cites yet another study where researchers collected data from 1,283 U.S. organizations during July and August of 2020 for benefits advisory and brokerage firm Gallagher's 2021 salary planning survey. Among the segment of employers that indicated COVID-19 had forced them to reevaluate their 2021 salary increase plans, 51% expected to reduce their salary increases, and 45% plan to suspend salary increases altogether. As an alternative to salary increases, the Society of Human Resource Management highlights the fact that Gallagher's report suggested variable pay, such as annual bonuses, which can save money and serve as an investment in future success. And you'll see in some of our attachments further on that we do have some sectors in the city that are above average, and we feel very strongly that rather than pay increases, that the bonus or lump sum cash incentive would be highly effective. So the recommendation of this committee on section 1, as before, the committee recommends the city also consider competitive market pay adjustments rather than general pay increases. City leaders are advised to appropriate funding towards pay and salary range adjustments necessary to ensure the city remains competitive with other employers based upon cost of labor data, as described on page 5 of this report. Considering the significant impact of COVID-19 on employer salary budgets in 2020 and 2021, if base salary increases are not possible, city leaders may wish to consider offering lump sum cash payments as an alternative to base pay salary increases. Moving on to section number 2, Salt Lake City recruitment, turnover, and labor statistics. With the pandemic, these numbers that we're going to go over here were not a surprise to anybody. We all knew that adjustments had to be made, cuts had to be made. But if you'll look at the posted jobs for last year, there were 348 jobs posted, which was a 20% decrease from 2019, where they posted 434 jobs. And of those, they received a total of 13,818 applications, which was an 18% decrease from 2019, where we had 16,854 applications. And of that 348 jobs, we ended up hiring 379 employees, which was a 34% decrease compared to 573 in 2019. So those numbers aren't really surprising considering what we've gone through. But you might be asking why 348 jobs and we hired 379 employees. Well, if you look at our firefighters and our police officers, usually an application is for multiple positions. And so that's where that increase in that number is from. A more detailed review of the total number of external applicants and hires made by the city for union-covered positions in the past year continues to demonstrate the vast majority of its job applicants and new hires from the local job market. And if we look on page 4 of your report, this is our 2020 union job recruitment statistics, and that it was solely through AFSCME, which is the public sector employees. And as you can see, I'll try to keep this short, but for the jobs that were posted, the great majority of the awarded positions went to local Utahns, which is a good thing for our people. The trade and craft, out of 2,299 external applicants, 2,063 or 90% were from Utah. And out of 79 hires, 78 were from Utah. That's 99%. Clerical and administrative support, of 1,077 external applicants, 945 or 88% were from Utah. And out of the 37 hired, 100% were from Utah. Paraprofessionals, 449 external applicants, 356 or 79% were from Utah. Out of the 5 hires, 4, which was 80%, were from Utah. So I think that's a good indicator of hiring our local people and keeping them employed, and I appreciate the efforts of the city for doing that. Our police officers, of 1,595 external applicants, 1,189 or 75% were from Utah, and of 45 hires, 42 or 93% were from Utah, and 5 were rehires. Firefighters, you had 1,122 external applicants, 724 were from Utah for 65%, and out of 25 that were hired, 22 or 88% were from Utah. So on the whole, turnover rates among the city's workforce decreased compared to last year and remain substantially below the past 5-year average overall and voluntary turnover rates, which are 9.1% and 7.7% respectively. And you can see that in the chart. The overall turnover dipped from 8.4% in 2019 to 7.8% in 2020. Of the 213 employees that voluntarily left the city throughout the past year, the number of retirements remained steady at 73 compared to 75 in 2019. So that's a good trend line that we're following there, reducing the voluntary turnover rate from 7.3% down to 4.8%. With regard to sworn public safety employees, the committee noted the total number of firefighters and police officers who left city employment in 2020 include 14 firefighters, which is approximately 4.3% of all firefighters, including 1 dismissal, 6 resignations, and 7 retirements. And 52 police officers, which is approximately 12.8% of all patrol officers, including 38 resignations and 14 retirements. And a comparative analysis of turnover among all employees in each city department is included for reference in Appendix A of this report. Finally, the committee also reviewed changes in the National Consumer Price Index, which is a measure focuses exclusively on the estimated cost for a standard selection of goods and services utilized by a typical consumer. Based on information obtained through the Utah Department of Workforce Services, costs appear to have risen at a significantly lesser rate compared to last year. Although there is no CPI data specific to Utah, the latest cost of living indicator for Salt Lake City, obtained from Mercer in 2019, is 96% compared to the US average. Although cost of living is often referred to in a more common vernacular as a means to help gauge the potential need for pay adjustments, this committee asserts best practices is to compensate employees based on cost of labor rather than cost of living. This approach is most widely known as market-based pricing. Human resource practitioners and major industry consultants such as Mercer mutually agree pay practices based on cost of labor is the preferred method based because it reflects what it costs to actually employ someone in a certain city or geographic area for a specific type of work. Cost of labor is, of course, influenced by cost of living, but it also includes supply of talent in a particular city or area, demand for that talent, what competing companies in the same city or general market area pay, and desirability to live in the city. As stated in the report on a special survey conducted by Mercer for Salt Lake City in 2019, some cities have a significantly higher cost of living than cost of labor, which is often driven by the desirability for living in that area, such as New York City, Los Angeles, Miami. Many people live there, and there is a high demand for housing, food, and transportation, etc., which results in high prices for consumers. However, this high demand also results in a robust labor supply pool, which offsets the premiums that companies would otherwise need to pay for workers. So the recommendation of this committee for Section 2 is considering the city's present success in attracting larger applicant pools and low turnover, there is good evidence to generally support and demonstrate the city's current human capital strategies are successfully achieving desirable results. In addition, the committee recommends city leaders continue to rely on a market-based pricing approach, which is the cost of labor, to determine appropriate compensation levels for jobs and employees. And that is my report on the first two sections. If there's any questions, I'd be more than willing to try to answer them for you. Otherwise, I'll turn my time over to Marlene.
Council members? I don't see any questions. Thank you for that, Jeff. I appreciate it. And with that, Marlene, thank you for being here. I'll turn the time over to you.
My pleasure to be back. Can everyone hear me okay? I usually have problems with my microphone. I believe I met many of you last year, so it's a pleasure to see you again. And I'm going to cover the two sections that are going to be noted on pages 6 and 7 of the report that you have. On page 6, it talks about the city living wage, which considers a model that relies on geographically specific data that's related to individuals or families regarding minimum necessities such as food, transportation, health insurance, housing, and other costs for other basic necessities. This year, there was a significant increase in the living wage, moving to $15.11 an hour from $12.05 from last year, which is a 25% increase. When I compared the report noted last year to the one that's in your 2021 analysis, which is noted as Appendix B in the back of the document, you can see that there's a significant change in transportation and medical cost at approximately 20%, housing at 11%, and food costs at 5% over the prior year's numbers. The city is still above the living wage when it comes to your regular full-time employees, with the lowest paid being around $16.87 per hour, which is about 11% higher than the $15.11 that's noted as the living wage for 2021. Those that do fall below the living wage of $15.11 include temporary employees, such as your golf division and your groundskeepers. So keeping that in mind, the recommendation is basically the same as we've had in the past, which is continuing to monitor the living wage to ensure that your full-time regular employees do not fall below what's needed for basic necessities of life. And that if you do any adjustments in living wage, to find it to do so in a way that minimizes your pay compression and allows employees to still provide for those living expenses. So with that, is there any question in regards to how the city addresses the living wage?
Council members? No, keep going, Marlene. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next section, section 6, has to do with the local market pay comparison. The committee reviews market data, including base wages and salaries from approximately 100 locally based private and public employers with operations along the Wasatch Front. The committee has the same recommendation as last year. Consider the base compensation plus the economic value of your public benefits so that you use 100% of those two combined as your baseline for a competitive number on your wages. The noted value of the public sector benefits has not changed from last year, and it has a value of $3,152. As in past years, the committee continues to recommend the council look at those that slightly lead or lag, or significantly lead or lag from what the market comparisons show. Priority should be given to those that significantly lag, which in the appendix C1 and C2 are noted in red, and that is defined as being, one moment please. On page 9 of a report, the significantly leading or lagging is that the actual median employee pay rates plus the overall additional economic value of the public sector benefits are at or more than 6% below market or at or greater than 10% above market. We also would consider or would ask that you consider looking at those that slightly lag, which are noted in yellow in those appendices C1 and C2. Those would be noted by actual median employee pay rates plus the overall additional economic value of public sector benefits that are 5.9% below market or up to 9.9% above market. We'd also like to point out that in comparing some of the jobs from this year and last year, that there were some that did move in status into a slightly or significantly lagging status market. Now, this could be related to turnover with new hires, and it would be prudent for the council to understand why some of these positions may have changed. And just to point out, there are about 6 of them. You've got your union, which is the air ops specialists and airfield maintenance, who moved from a competitive white arena into a significantly lagging of red. But those are both union positions. Your HRIS analyst moved from slightly lagging yellow to significantly lagging, which is noted in red. Your mental health counselor moved from slightly lagging to significantly lagging. Your procurement specialist moved from competitive to slightly lagging. And both your union senior secretary and your union senior secretary, moved from slightly lagging to significant. And then the union water meter was still significantly lagging, but their percentage increased. So just that kind of jumped out at us as we were looking at the reports, and just when you're looking at considerations for bringing those people up to where they need to be, those might be a few that you want to hone in on. The committee continues to recommend the council also address compensation for those that significantly lead, which is 10% plus, in a way that it will not continue to escalate the gap on market pay rates. bonus pays and things of that nature would be something that you might recommend if you find that you want to award someone who is needing to increase but not increasing their pay. And one thing that we would like to note is last year it was recommended that your public safety employees, your firefighters, your policemen, should continue to maintain comp and benefit level that's actually at 105 to 120% above market. That by maintaining this lead, it will help act as a tool to address turnover, recruitment, and retention concerns that were noted by Jeff in the previous discussion that he had prior to this. So with that, are there any questions from the committee in regards to how we did our comparison or the results of those reports?
Council members? I don't see any hands or questions. I want to thank both of you for being here today and the entire committee for the work that you do for our employees and for our city. It's such an important job that you guys do, and I know how seriously and thoroughly you do those jobs. And I want to just, again, thank you for all of your time and that you put into this, into making sure that we are being both fair and competitive and doing the best that we can for our city workers. And so thank you so much for your time and for being with us. And please extend my thanks to the rest of the committee as well. Does anyone have any questions for David either? Sorry, David, I know that you just hopped off, but I don't see any questions. So we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you all. All right, we are almost there. I want to thank everyone. I know it's been a long work session and a long day today, but we are on agenda item number 9, which is our CDBG and other federal grants plan for fiscal year 2021-2022. I have Ben Ledke from the council office, Lonnie Eggerson-Goff from HAND, and the rest of her HAND staff. And then Blake Thomas is also here as the CAN director. So I will turn it over to Ben.
The annual HUD grants are one of the most significant ongoing funding sources the city receives from the federal government. These ongoing annual grants are different than the CARES Act HUD grants the council approved last month, which were one time. As typically happens, the requested funding from applicants exceeds the available grant funds. There is one exception this year. The home grant funding is slightly less than the available funding. So all of the home applicants, the amount of funding they're requesting, even if you give everything they're asking for, there's still a little bit left. Some quick reminders. The city established a $30,000 minimum award to balance the community benefits and the cost of administering a federal grant. So if the council wanted to shift funding between grants, you can't go below $30,000. The council receives 2 sets of funding recommendations, one from advisory boards and another from the mayor. The Housing and Urban Development Department places limits on how much funding can go to the CDBG public services category. It's capped at 15% of the total CDBG funding. This is the most competitive category. It has the most number of applications. So if the council wants to add funding to an application in public services, it requires you to shift funding away from another application also in the public services category. And I'm available over the coming weeks if you have any questions or if you want to explore ideas about how to shift funding between applications. The applications must advance one of the 5 goals in the 2020-2024 consolidated plan. These goals and strategies are on the last page of the funding log. That's attachment 2, and it's also on page 4 of the staff report. All of the council members, you should have received a hard copy of attachment 1 and 2. That's the summary of applications list and then the full funding log. This year, there are a total of 10 applications where the advisory board and the mayor have different funding recommendations. 3 of those 10 differences are greater than $10,000. The table showing these differences is on page 2 of the staff report. There are 13 new applications which are marked new in the previous grant awards. This is the middle column on the funding log. 2 applications were disqualified, and you can quickly see which ones they are because it's in red text on the far right column of the funding log. There are 4 returning applications that previously received grant awards but are not recommended for funding this year. Those 4 applications are listed at the top of page 3 of the staff report. There are 6 policy questions for the council to consider on page 3 of the staff report. Since this is the first briefing on the annual HUD grants, the council will typically review the applications, either with the administration giving a quick explanation of what the application is, or we can just go page by page on the funding log, see if council members have any questions, and go page by page until we get through them. We can certainly do it a different way if the chair has another idea. With that, I'm done with my intro. I'll turn it over to Blake Thomas, the CAN director, and then I think there's a short presentation from HAN staff, and then we can get to the applications.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Council Chair and Council members, for the opportunity to review the Mayor's funding recommendations for the city's annual HUD entitlement grant programs for the coming fiscal year, 2021 to 2022. It's fun seeing everyone flip through what looks like they're 11 by 17 printouts. Glad that we can have a good sight on it. I just wanted, without being too redundant to Ben's introduction, I just wanted to take a brief moment to set the table for you and members of the public that are tuned in. These are annual funds separate from other federal relief funding that the city has received, such as the $7.1 million in HUD CB funding, the $6 million in Treasury emergency rental assistance, or the $1.1 million that Council approved last year for housing stability. The additional funding that we saw this year is the unfortunate product of unforeseen impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has really shined a light on the inequities of housing security within our community and across the country. The pandemic also exacerbated the ongoing need for community funding for homelessness services. We always have a need for homelessness funding in Salt Lake City and always welcome federal, state, and other funding sources to help us shoulder this state and regional responsibility. So that being said, with your approval, I'll turn it over to Tony Milner, who has a brief presentation prepared to outline the proposed use of the $6.7 million for our HUD entitlement grant program. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Blake. And of course, thank you, Council Chair and Council members. I'm sure you're starting to get sick of seeing me, but fortunately, it's that time of year where we review these funds. Again, huge appreciation to Council staff Ben for summarizing the Mayor's recommendations and his analysis in his staff report that everyone is flipping through at the moment. And Council Chair, with your permission, I would like to just take like 5 minutes just to kind of paint the big picture for these funds, if that's okay. Okay. So this coming year, 21-22 actually marks the 46th year for Salt Lake City as a HUD entitlement city, and we greatly value and uphold the impact that these funds have in our city year after year. I'd greatly like to recognize the city's resident advisory boards, the Housing Trust Fund Advisory Board, as well as the Community Development and Capital Improvement Boards for their many, many hours of review, recommendations, and scoring of the applications that we receive through a competitive application process. I'd also like to recognize the amazing hand staff for all their detailed administration of these federal grants, staying up on HUD compliance, all the changes, assisting the boards, all the tracking, the reporting, the monitoring, as well as assisting community partners with technical assistance. We did provide council staff a graph as a summary of the con plan, if that could be brought up or be shared. Excellent. Thanks, Bobby. So again, I just want to underscore, Ben already mentioned it, but I just want to underscore that these funds recommended in front of you are associated to the city's 5-year consolidated plan for 2020, 2024. It's also referred to as a 5-year strategic plan. This was approved last year. So we're just finishing up the first year, year 1 of the plan. And so this coming year, the recommendations in front of you will be for year 2. So the con plan is the product of an intensive collaborative process to identify community development needs and establish goals, priorities, and strategies to address those needs. The 5-year plan provides a framework for maximizing and leveraging the city's block grant allocations to build healthy and sustainable communities and to help focus the use of these funds. Good news, Ben kind of mentioned this, the recommendations that we do or need to advance the goals that you see there. All the recommendations in front of you for year 2 actually do advance the 5 consolidated plan goals, which is great, which is what we just want to see. After every year, we do officially report to HUD whether or not we're meeting our stated goals or not. This report is made available to the mayor, the council, and the public. A quick snapshot for how we're doing for this first year. Most organizations that the city did fund in the current year were affected by COVID delays and temporary disruptions, but all have been able to conduct their programs, their services, and are on target to meet their spend downs and outcomes for the year, which is great. Thanks, Bobby. You can take down the graphic. Coming up, so we look forward to the scheduled public hearing that's scheduled for April 6th. That's where the mayor will introduce her recommendations, and we value the opportunity to have the applicants and the members of the community give input for these recommendations. Also, we look forward to the opportunity to provide you additional information about these recommendations in additional council briefings that are scheduled. So overall, please know that this process of reviewing and recommending the applications for the city's annual HUD funding is just as difficult for us as it is for the boards, the mayor, and I'm sure yourselves. All of these applications represent services and projects by organizations who work really hard to make our community better, but the city does face the issue of available funding versus requested funding. So with that, Council Chair, thank you again for letting me kind of paint that big picture. I'll kind of stop here and see how yourself or council staff would like to proceed.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you to the hand staff and to Ben. So I have a couple of suggestions at this point. One, so it is 8:30 and I feel like it's been a long day. So I want to spend a few minutes, if somebody has already looked through their packet and has just a very specific question on something right now. We're not going to go page by page or line by line at this point. If there is something that caught your eye and you have a question, I would love for you to be able to ask administration and or the mayor. Then what I propose we do is all of you take the time you need to go through this and get small group meetings and or emails or questions answered about this. Meet with Ben. And we can do this sort of in my opinion, everybody needs a minute to digest all of this. That's why if there's a specific question that you have right now that would help you continue to digest this, and then we will come back on April 6th with a little bit more, since we've done the overview, we can spend some time going through some of these questions, and maybe if people want to reallocate or have ideas to reallocate or want to make that a little bit more of that open conversation. But I think that it is all up to us to look through this and ask the questions that we have. And I don't think that right now we need to do this line by line when there might be, it's late. It feels late. It's been a long day, and there might be just some things that people, like I said, need to digest a little bit. So that's how we're going to play this. We're going to spend a little bit of time seeing if there's specific questions. And go. Andrew.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just have the obvious one comes from the staff report and the discrepancies between the board and the mayor. CDBG housing, assist emergency home repair and accessibility community design. It's the biggest change in the packet, it seems like. Is there some background information perhaps from the mayor's office or HANT?
Sure, I can speak to that. So again, these are CDBG funds that have been recaptured that were unspent in previous years. They need to be going towards similar activities such in housing and neighborhood improvement. It was basically the CDCIP board who does the recommendations are only able to do it up to the total asks for all of those in housing and neighborhood improvement, leaving the remainder funds for the mayor to direct those funds as well. A lot of those projects are kind of at their max. They're not really scalable. They can't really go any further. So we went to HAND staff reached out to Assist because they're the top applicant and basically just said, what is the capacity? What is the need? They were very happy to hear that. They've actually seen a huge increase for doing the small repairs for seniors, disabled, so they can stay and remain in their home. And so that's why remaining funds were given to, or recommended, I should say, towards Assist.
So the full 275 is just remaining funds that we've recommended allocating in there?
Okay. Yes.
Thanks.
I'm going to do just a quick follow-up to that. Actually, I'll come back. I'll do that on my own. Go ahead. So Anna had her hand up, and then Chris.
I had a question on the Geraldine King Resource Center, and I see that they have double applied for, I guess, for funding, but one is for employment. And then the other, let's see, the other one is for emergency solutions. So it was granted, or it was recommended to do the one for emergency solutions. But what I don't understand is they didn't apply for the same thing. Like they did apply for funding twice, but not for the same projects, right? Not for the same use of funds, right? And then if that's the case, we're not, there's no recommendation to fund like the one that didn't get funded. I don't know if that makes sense. If somebody can clarify what's going on with the King Resource Center.
Sure. No, that's a very good question, Councilmember Valdemoros. So you can see too from the different recommendations, the CDCIP board and the Housing Trust Fund Advisory Board, they really, for through this, they really kind of let their scores kind of speak. And so they usually go down from their highest scoring until they're out of funds. The King was pulled out based on their conversation, their recommendation, because they had applied for 30,000 for ESG and were being recommended in this cycle for 30,000 of ESG. and not being recommended in the other category for CDBG. There was discussion to then take their recommendation and then go down the list and then pass that out to the other higher scoring applicants. So that was a brief summary of the conversation, kind of the thought process that CDCIP board had in making that recommendation.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Any other kind of general specific questions? That doesn't make any sense. Darren.
I just wanted to see, I remember last year, I think we talked a lot about the Journey of Hope application, and I noticed that they scored pretty low again. And I think, and maybe this was something that couldn't have happened with COVID, but I remember the discussion being that we were going to try and work with that applicant to try and strengthen their applicant for this coming round. And I'm wondering if there's just any kind of anecdotal insight as to what happened and why they're still scored pretty low. Maybe I'm just interested in that.
Sure. Yeah, no, good question and good memory, Councilman Mano. So what we did is they weren't funded last year. We did take council's recommendation to have hand staff reach out and do technical assistance with that organization. We set up a time to meet with them. It was their executive director, a couple of board members, and I think even a couple of key stakeholders. We had a good conversation about how best to write for a grant for the city for this funding for CDBG, even though CDBG public services is still pretty competitive. So it was a really good conversation that really kind of talked about all the amazing work that this organization does, but then to really kind of hone that down to a very specific program that is benefiting Salt Lake City residents, and then how they collaborate with other partners in the community, et cetera. So the main thing was just really just kind of honing it down. When they received the application is valid. We put it forward to the CDCIP board. Their comments were to the effect of it was a very broad application. And so that's a very quick summary of kind of feedback from about that particular application.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I have a brief question for administration and the mayor. As I was going through this the other day, I kind of made a note of like, could ARA funds be used here, and then we could use that money somewhere else to fund something that maybe ARA funds couldn't be used for. And I know we don't have really a lot of time in this process to kind of do that, especially when we don't have guidelines out from the Department of Treasury yet for those ARA funds. But, and I assume I already know the answer to this question, but Can Hand and Madam Mayor, are you kind of using, at least for part of it, this process or these applications to help inform how we spend some of that ARA money?
Yeah, there's been several processes, you know, that we've gone through in the different tranches of money that have come through, and different applications that have come up that either fit the CARES Act dollars or didn't, or I think in a lot of cases where agencies didn't have the capacity to do more, which Tony's referred to even in this batch of applications. So what we do know about the ARA dollars is that they're far more flexible than dollars we've had in the past. And there's the timeline flexibility out to 2024 that we didn't have before. So this is a far more dynamic pool of money, and we'll of course be anxious to see what the Treasury stipulations are on those dollars. But we feel, I think, very generally like there is a great deal more opportunity to not just supplement the programs that the community organizations are currently doing, but help them be able to address in new ways with new programming, perhaps even with the staffing support that they need to do it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's sort of what I was hoping, is that some of these programs I'm looking at that maybe didn't get funding, there's still a shimmer of hope that they'll be there to help our communities, and we know the good work they're doing, and there might be some other ways that we can support them. And so it was silver lining, a little bit of a silver lining there in looking at these applications. So I appreciate that. With that, council members, at first I want to thank Hand in Hand again and Madam Mayor for being here. And I'm just going to say, y'all have 2 weeks to go through this, ask your questions, have your small group meetings, go through what you need to go through to really digest this so that we can have a meaningful conversation in 2 weeks about this. And that's also when our public hearing is. And so I don't know if council staff is probably like, wait, it's not on the work session agenda for 2 weeks. It is now, if it wasn't. So go through, do your due diligence on these things, and let's come back and hand out as much money as we can later this month, okay? Or in April. It's been a long day, as I've said several times, but everybody's done a lot of good work. And I think there were some really tough conversations that needed to happen and that came back with some really positive things, I think. So thank you all for hanging in there and having these conversations and doing this work. Cindy, we're not done yet. We have announcements, but there might be something else.
Just announcement.
Okay, there's nothing from me. James, do you have anything? Okay, there's nothing from James. Cindy, we'll turn the time over to you.
Okay, just one item, and that is ranked choice voting. And that is going along pretty well. There was some state action that extended the deadline. So the decision does not need to be made until the first week of May. The last chance for you to do that in a council meeting would be May 4th. Salt Lake County has indicated that they would be able to do ranked choice voting. And so the recorder's office has really done a lot of good work on this, and they will be coming back to you with a briefing in April, and then you'll have time to discuss it and decide. They also have just today provided the cost estimates, and they have 3 estimates. One is for just the regular election. The other is ranked choice voting with a primary, and the final is ranked choice voting without a primary. And so you'll be receiving that information. And then the thing that we need council members to be thinking about from a policy point of view is whether you feel like there's adequate time to do a solid public education plan program for the ranked choice voting. When we started this, there were many barriers, and now we're down to just that last question. So that will be discussed in April, and you'll have a lot of information before then. That's it.
Thank you, Cindy. And just a quick perspective about that education piece is that there was a big education piece when we moved to mail-in voting. And so we wanted to make sure that we feel that we're fully educating our communities about this, about ranked choice voting if where the council goes. So that, just to keep that in mind. Andrew.
For that discussion, will we have the current projected costs if we keep with our current system, primary?
Yes.
General, so we can compare that cost with this cost and look at that? Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And the costs, I saw them quickly this evening. They did not look outrageous to me. It wasn't dramatic, the difference between the two approaches. So, and we'll email that out to you as soon as we're finished here tonight. And then it'll be part of your packet as well. So I think cost wouldn't be your biggest factor. I think it would be the, public policy weighing of how you feel like that'll work for your constituents and the timing.
The costs are in your inboxes at 6 p.m.
Okay, there you go. Thanks, Ben.
All right. One of the reasons I love our staff. Everyone, I think that is all we have for tonight's council meeting. Thank you all, and we are adjourned. Dunzos.